cadets. Hanged himself last night. I'm afraid that's not the end of it. His heart was carved from his chest.
Poe, I need you to discreetly infiltrate the cadets. What is this? Blood, symbols, rituals.
Oh, my lord.
Man will do most anything to cheat death.
Hello, everybody in Internet Land. I'm Mason.
I'm Matt.
And welcome back to Double Feature, the podcast where we watch a movie that just came out recently, and then we each propose a second, older movie to pair with it as a double feature. Matt, before we get started this week, I have been diving back into my artistic exploits.
Nice.
Yeah, and I wrote a poem.
Oh, really?
I did. Would you like to hear it?
Yeah, of course.
That was the right answer because you were going to anyway. All right, here we go. On our journeys cinematic, some films we may find erratic, but I'd rather them than static works of art that I deplore. Lockdown shots and lifeless color, line deliveries dull and duller, grind my soul down like a muller. Watching them is quite the chore. Lord, please save me from a film where watching it is quite the chore. That would be an awful bore.
I have a feeling that you have a feeling it relates to a movie we're about to talk about.
Really? What makes you think that?
Because we saw many lockdown shots and total line readings from high-grade actors.
Oh, what a cast.
In a movie called The Pale Blue Eye.
Yeah, on a completely unrelated note, we watched The Pale Blue Eye last week.
Yeah.
Where do we even start with this?
Christian Bale in his second movie in a row where he plays a detective after he wasn't an actual detective but did detecting in Amsterdam.
That's true.
He plays Augustus Landor.
Yeah, famed, renowned detective, Augustus Landor. They make a point of that.
Yeah, I guess he's a Pennsylvania detective on the outskirts of the West Point Academy.
Yes.
Which we'll get to.
Yes. Yeah, he's invited to the academy to investigate the recent
suicide, apparently.
Yeah, it seems to be a suicide at first, but everyone seems to be a little suspicious about it, even so, of a cadet. And while he's investigating this incident, he enlists the help of a young West Point cadet to be the Watson to his Holmes.
Yes, and that cadet is famed author Edgar Allan Poe, played by Harry Melling, who you might remember from various Harry Potter films and from The Tragedy of Macbeth and notably Buster Scruggs, and from a movie I didn't even finish called The Devil All the Time.
Oh, I never even heard of that.
That was another one with a good cast. I think it had Robert Pattinson, but I can't remember, but it had Jason Clarke, whom I like, and oh boy, that was a terrible movie. I had to turn it off and never return to it. Another Netflix film.
Yeah. I knew that I recognized him, and like right after we left the screening room, you know this, I was on my phone like trying to figure out where I'd seen this guy before, because I couldn't place him in a role, but face was so familiar, and in the process I completely forgotten he was Dudley Dursley.
See, I first saw him in Buster Scruggs. I saw that, I think, before I watched the Harry Potter films, and in which he looks quite different. He looks a lot like he does in Buster Scruggs, honestly.
Yeah, and that was what I recognized him from immediately, and I just could not place him for the life of me.
What year does this take place in? Do you remember?
1830.
Okay.
I think that would have been about the time Edgar Allan Poe actually was a cadet at West Point.
Yes.
He famously got kicked out, and this would have been about the time he actually was at the school. I think, more or less, anyway.
We meet Timothy Spall as some kind of...
He's the superintendent. They
he's
keep
not
addressing him as colonel.
Yeah, he's superintendent there. But do you know who was actually, I think, the superintendent of West Point when Edgar Allan Poe went there?
Would it have been Lee?
Yes. whom I kept thinking was going to turn out to be the murderer. It's like, that was my big suspect, was Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, I don't remember when he was. I know he was commandant at West Point, but I don't remember when he was.
It was when Edgar Allan Poe was a cadet.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
boy. Now, why didn't they make a movie about that?
Which is what we're going to say many times during this. This never has a movie, like when we looked up what movie to go see, I picked this one, or at least I suggested it, because it sounded like a good movie.
Well, and then I looked up something about it, and it's like, come on, the premise is Christian Bale and Edgar Allan Poe investigate dastardly goings-on at West Point. What's not to like about that?
It sounds great.
It sounds great.
Great premise, and it's based on a novel, so somebody read it and was like, let's make this.
Yep. To go into mild spoilers right now, although I've got no problem spoiling everything about
I
this.
think we should avoid too many spoilers.
Okay, well-
we'll dance around some things.
Okay, well, then to go into very mild spoilers, the climax of the film involves a fist fight, a human sacrifice, a rescue attempt,
Fall of a House of Usher.
yeah, a burning building that is collapsing, and a, really twisted, relationshipy dynamic. I don't want to go any further into that because that really would tip some things.
Yes.
But, all of those elements, how do you take them and make them boring? Should we ask Scott Cooper?
What's your familiarity with the work of Scott Cooper?
I basically zero. I've heard of Antlers. I've heard of Crazy Heart. I know that's what Jeff Bridges won his Oscar for. Scott Cooper is one of those guys who several of his films have been on my to-watch list for several years, but I've never gotten around to any of them. I actually think I own Crazy Heart, and I've never seen it. So no familiarity, basically.
Scott Cooper's made several movies. Antlers is his most recent film, which I had never heard of, but I've seen all of his others, I think. I've seen Crazy Heart. I've seen Out of the Furnace, his first Christian Bale movie. I've seen Black Mass.
Oh, that's right. He did make Black Mass, didn't he?
Yeah, did you see that
No,
one?
I didn't see that.
Okay.
No, I have notes here about, and I was looking down as he's directed 5 films.
Yeah, then he did Hostiles with Christian Bale.
Okay.
And I think that I really didn't care for Crazy Heart and was out on this Scott Cooper guy. Then Out of the Furnace is not a terrible movie. It's one I would rewatch, but it's kind of a crazy, overbaked bro-fest action film. I didn't really like it.
Yeah.
But then, a lot of people maligned Black Mass, I think, is not a movie people remember fondly. I think it's pretty entertaining.
You're not the first person to tell me that.
I liked Black Mass, and then I didn't hate Hostiles.
Okay, so for you, he's got a good track record. For me, he had
It's a mixed bag. No track record. Yeah, I have no idea what Antlers even is. I'm assuming horror.
Yeah, kind of fantasy horror from the plot description. Yeah.
It's almost like he's tracking upward to me until this movie was over with. This, I was like, oh yeah, him with Christian Bale again. Hostiles was all right, but I also confuse him with the director Gavin O'Connor, whom I'm not sure if I've actually seen his movies. I was like, oh yeah, Scott Cooper, he makes modern action movies, and then he kind of does, but he kind of doesn't.
Yeah, that wasn't this.
No, this was not an action movie. This is a mystery. A cadet has pretty much hung himself, it seems like.
Yes.
But then someone has come along after the fact and cut his heart out. And sewn his chest back together. And the school doctor / coroner, Tobey Maguire. Toby Jones.
You're having Babylon flashbacks. my
Yeah, I
friend.
wish I was.
Yeah, Toby Jones, most famously from Wayward Pines.
I'm not even familiar with that.
Oh, we can talk about that later. Or, that's a joke. I like Wayward Pines, but it's definitely not.
Not what he's known for?
No, because he's a character actor and he's been in literally every freaking
Yes,
thing.
that's what I know of Toby Jones from
Yeah.
this every movie.
He is the coroner. He investigates the situation, kind of. Obviously, something's not right. They call Landor in what is, I thought it was an initially promising promising scene. I think it was the scene I had the strongest reaction to. He has the cadet who's got, he's clearly under rigor, so they drop him in the bathtub to loosen him up a little bit, and then Christian Bale literally breaks his fingers open one by one to see if he's holding anything, which, as it turns out, he is. A small fragment of a note, which becomes important later on in the plot.
When they start trying to decipher what the fragments are, it's missing. And even what the words are, they can see parts of. He immediately pretty much decides this is not a suicide, it's a murder, and let's investigate this. And he's going to need to start questioning other cadets to find out what was going on in this cadet's life, and questioning, we think, faculty. And this is where we get some interesting things, which we've already seen, is when Landor arrives at West Point. No one's there. Is the West Point on winter break? Like, this is the most crazy thing, is how unpopulated West Point is.
I can kind of, I have the same problem. I can kind of buy this in that, it's very clearly wintertime. And if I'm a cadet, I'm going to want to be outside in the winter in New York as little as possible. At one point, at least, did the cadets start out on barracks restriction? Because I know they eventually got there. And I don't remember if they started out that way temporarily or if that was a development later in the case. I don't remember a lot about this movie. I gotta be honest with you.
I remember that the movie starts off promisingly enough with this scene of them doing the autopsy of sorts, and not really, but investigating the corpse, and Christian Bale kind of offending them in declaring it a murder. You can tell Toby Jones is not too jazzed to find out that it's a murder, and he's kind of been shown up at his job, and as it's Toby Jones, we suspect he might have hidden agendas. And we suspect Timothy Spall might too, because he's Timothy Spall. Mm-hmm. Then there's a third guy. Who is this guy?
I actually don't remember. Yeah. There was a third guy.
Yeah, and it seemed like another, I guess he's Captain Hitchcock, played by
Simon McBurney.
I don't know. Who is Simon McBurney?
Okay. Simon McBurney has been, again, he's one of those journeyman actors.
Yeah.
He's been in a ton of stuff over the last 30 years. Let's see. I know that I must have seen him.
And what do we know about him is that he's British.
Yeah. How many actors in this film are British, Matt?
All but two.
All of the major actors but two. Let's run down the list. We have Christian Bale, obviously.
Yes.
We have Harry Melling. We have Timothy Spall. We have Toby Jones. Toby Jones has two kids, one played by Harry Lawty, and a daughter played by Lucy Boynton, whom I actually really like. I was pleased to see her in this because I've enjoyed her in several
She was good in the movie.
In the past. She was pretty decent in the movie, yeah.
And we have Gillian Anderson as Toby Jones's wife.
Yes, and she is one of the two prominent Americans in the cast.
Although that's not who... Yeah, I guess she is. So we have a third. We have Charlotte Gainsbourg, which we'll get to later. And then we have a couple of scenes with a major American actor who I haven't seen in some years that we'll get to later.
Yes. Well, we can get to them now.
Okay.
If you want to, because we're kind of at the point where during their investigation they turn up evidence that they think there may have been some black magic rituals involved. Christian Bale doing some old-fashioned detective work, like Batman should.
Yes.
And uncovers a magic circle, which sends him straight into...
And we get there are some animals that are also have their hearts cut out.
Yeah, there was a
in
cow,
the woods.
And were there two, or was there just a cow?
I think there was also maybe a cat or something, or some kind of small woodland creature.
Okay, so
which is
else.
As little as interest as this film seems to have in West Point, the life of West Point. It has a lot of interest in pretty shots of the woods.
Yes.
In winter.
Yes.
That's the major thing. We get a lot of that, and I thought of the director Terrence Malick a lot during the film, and in particular The New World with the shots of the woods. And Christian Bale has a story, which is he's a drunkard whose daughter has run away a year previous, and we get flashbacks of the daughter that are also done in a very Terrence Malick style. And it turns out this movie cost $70 million.
God.
And I was thinking, what did they spend this money on? Because the effects seem fairly practical, which is nice.
I hope it was the cast.
But there aren't many extras. They didn't film at the real West Point. There's a lot of the woods, and I was wondering, does it cost this much money to shoot in the woods? Which put to mind Terrence Malick movies that don't cost $70 million, in which Christian Bale was in too. Years ago, Terrence Malick...
Night of Cups, and what else was he
He's in The New World.
Oh, okay. I still haven't seen that.
Those are the two best post Thin Red Line Terrence Malick movies. The theatrical version of The New World is, I think, the best Terrence Malick movie.
Okay.
But then Night of Cups is not as good, but it's better than, I think, all of the ones that have come out in recent years. However, years ago now, there was a letter that Terrence Malick's people sent to the actor Tom Noonan, who acted in one or two movies for John Cassavetes. Mm-hmm. And they asked Tom Noonan how John Cassavetes got these realistic, naturalistic, great scenes with these actors. This production should have written a letter to Christian Bale and asked him how Terrence Malick got all those footage of the woods without spending $70 million.
Yeah, I don't know that there's much else to say about that.
The other good thing about the movie, though, is that they tell Christian Bale not to drink while he's on the job. And he immediately disobeys them and goes to a bar where we meet bartender Charlotte Gainsbourg, who is another non-American, non-British person, who's a French person. Mm-hmm. What do you know about Charlotte Gainsbourg?
Very little off the top of my head.
She stars in Lars von Trier movies and in Independence Day 2.
Oh, well then I know I've seen her.
And she's the daughter of famous late French singer, pop star Serge Gainsbourg, who has many great songs. One of his great songs is not a song called Lemon Incest, which he co-wrote and co-performs with his daughter Charlotte Gainsbourg, and has one of the creepiest music videos you will ever see. If you can make it to the end of it, you're more man or woman than I.
Okay, well I will make sure to never look that up because you have not made it sound enticing.
No, other Serge Gainsbourg songs are pretty cool. Not all of them.
But not that one. From what you're telling me, other Scott Cooper movies are pretty cool.
Yeah, I like Black Mass.
Yeah, but not this one.
No, not this one. There's so much to chew on that would be fun. You get this maybe satanic ritual. Mm-hmm. You get him enlisting Edgar Allan Poe, who he meets at the bar, I think, unless he he might question him earlier.
I think they did have a brief scene together, but Poe actually seeks him out at the bar. Basically, it's like, you have to take me on. I am the guy who can help you solve this case. And, goes... Harry Melling plays Edgar Allan Poe with a huge amount of ego, but also does have that kind of brilliance, although, very young, very naive, but you get the sense that he is a clever guy, and he actually can back up his stuff.
And he's doing a very big accent, kind of reminiscent of John Bernthal in We Own the City.
Okay.
But maybe even more southern sounding than Bernthal. How did you like Harry Melling in the movie?
Sad to say, his performance did not age well as the movie went on. The accent, I don't know what Edgar Allan Poe is supposed to have sounded like, but the soft southern drawl thing started to wear on me over time. And I really liked Poe more in the beginning when he was being kind of pompous about his abilities. As the movie went on and on and on, I just started to get a little bored with it.
So to investigate these possible satanic rites, they go to this old man who has all of these books that Christian Bale knows, that's an expert on things, and he's played by the great Robert Duvall, who it turns out has very little to do in this movie.
He's in like 2 scenes?
Yeah, sitting in a chair and talking. Doesn't make much of an impression.
No.
And we get this cool etching in a book, cool illustration in a book of satanic rites, and we think, oh man, we're in for some fun here with cool Satanist stuff, much like the much more fun movie The Ninth Gate, with Black Mass star Johnny Depp as a book detective who investigates a circle of Satanists that are trying to bring Satan back to life.
That would have been more fun than what we
Way
got.
more fun. They send Edgar Allan Poe in to infiltrate a prayer group.
Yeah, there's some sort of student, it kind of masquerades as a prayer group, but you get the sense it's more of like an underground cigars, whiskey, and cards club.
And that would have been a fun movie.
Yes.
Once again, not a bad idea.
No.
Doesn't go anywhere.
No, and the ring, well, it kind of does in a roundabout way, because the ringleader of this prayer group turns out to be a character named Artemis Marquis, whom anytime you run across a character who's named Artemis in a movie, I think you should immediately be suspicious.
Yes.
But Marquis, he's also the son of Toby Jones. This is Harry Laudie's character.
Ah.
Yeah, where do we go from there?
Well, the News Titans, another murder is committed. What's funny about these kind of movies where there's like a ritual that's supposed to be satanic is as soon as we see that there's a second murder, I assumed it had been, a month had gone by, like we were on some kind of Zodiac schedule. And the very next scene, Timothy Spall says, "It's been a month since you invested, since we started this." And I was like, no shit.
Yep, that's true. While Poe is trying to ingratiate himself into the circle of this group and get closer to Artemis, he's also getting closer to Artemis's sister, and this is Lucy Boynton's character.
Yes, and they start forming a love interest, and she has epilepsy.
Yes, and that is not revealed to us until it suddenly is, right while they're in the middle of a nature walk, like a getting to know you nature walk.
A few seconds after she coughs. And in a certain kind of movie, pretty much any movie, if a character coughs, you know that we're about to get a revelation that their health is quite poor.
Yep. So, Lucy Boynton from The Blackcoat's Daughter, Lucy Boynton from Murder on the Orient Express, from
I did see
Bohemian
that.
Rhapsody, where
I
she
saw that.
plays Rami Malek's wife. And, I mean, again, I've loved her in other things. She's good in this.
Yeah, I didn't have any problem with her in this.
But she's been better in other things, I think.
They decide that these two characters, or at least the son, it seems to be quite wrapped up in this, and they get themselves invited to Toby Jones's house for dinner. I think Toby Jones invites them over for dinner, and this also is where we hang out with Gillian Anderson as the mom, and she is terrible in this movie.
Oof.
And this really reminded me of the movie The Black Dahlia, another much more fun, if very flawed. Like, most people say The Black Dahlia is a bad movie, but it's a lot more fun than this one. Crime movie investigating murders, but in old-time LA. And Fiona Shaw plays the mom of this family that reminded me a lot of the family in this movie. And Gillian Anderson's performance basically seemed like a pastiche of the Fiona Shaw performance. It was really bad. She's doing a lot here. She
is a way too much. She's like Florence Foster Jenkinsing it up. I don't know. I really don't know why. Like, most of the performances are fine, but a lot of them are too mannered. And a lot of the dialogue is just delivered very flat and rote, and it's already got a lot of subtext to it, so I'm not really engaged with that material. And then she comes into the movie and she's just over the top. I wish more had been done with so many things in this movie, from the prayer group to the Satanism, but especially Christian Bale and Harry Melling's drunkenness, I wish had been a bigger part of the movie too. Yes. And the movie has two main mysteries going at this point that it kind of engage us. One is more on the back burner, but somehow involved me more, which was what happened to his daughter. I kept wondering if we're ever going to find out who his daughter ran away with, and I wanted to know. Yeah, we haven't talked about this, but Christian Bale has a history with West Point, and that's made explicit from his first couple scenes, that his detective character has a history with West Point. It's not a good history with West Point, and there's also a kind of connected mystery. He a couple of times mentions his daughter in a scene that actually did kind of engage me. This was fairly early on in the movie. Poe meets Detective Landor at the place he's staying, and Landor said, "I'm not a big fan of poetry," and Poe finds a volume of Byron on his shelf and basically calls him a liar. He's like, "That's my daughter's. She's gone." And so you're like, what happened to the daughter? Because she is the subject of the flashbacks you were talking about earlier. Yes. We do get both these mysteries resolved in the film.
Yes, we do. First, we get the mystery of who is committing the murders, we think solved in the climax of the movie. And they never give us any red herrings. They never give us much fun investigation. In fact, throughout the film, I kept thinking Christian Bale's not much of an investigator. He seems to follow like one lead a day. It's no surprise a whole month goes by without him solving this crime. They don't do much. Not much happens. It's pretty slow. Then it's resolved, and it's like, that was it? Well, it turns out that's not it. There's a big twist in the very end of the movie that, to me, did improve the movie somewhat. Because I was like, oh, now I at least see why someone thought this was a good idea. It reminded me of The Sixth Sense, where in the whole movie I thought it was a laughably bad cop movie. Then it had a twist, and I was like, oh, this kind of improved it. I really wish the rest of the movie still had been better. This was the same kind of deal, except for even worse.
Yeah, I did not have the same feeling about it that you did. I do agree with you that the twist ending does improve the movie. It does give a little more shade to one of our main characters. But by that point, I was just kind of done.
It's true, but I was like that with Sixth Sense as well. Also, this twist just asks more questions about the movie that make the movie somewhat make even less sense to me.
Yes.
But there is a big twist that does add a little something to the movie. And that's pretty much
without
the Pale Blue Eye.
Yeah, without spoiling, that's all we can say.
Yeah.
I really think.
We get references to various Poe stories that will come later, like there's The Raven. I think the title comes from the Lenore whatever, right? Thing. But we get references to The Raven, the Telltale Heart with the missing hearts, obviously. We get some Cask of the Amontillado with false floors.
Yes.
We get the fall of the House of Usher in the climax. Mm-hmm. And maybe more. I'm not the biggest Poe knowledgeable person, honestly. I wish I knew more.
No, but it hits the highlights. And I did notice that one of the things, we've been kind of bashing this movie. Let's say a few nice things about it, because it's not a poorly made movie.
It's not straight up awful.
No.
I did prefer Amsterdam quite a bit.
and we were both pretty uneven on Amsterdam.
Yeah.
The set design is really good. I mean, it's very realistic for the early to mid 19th century. It's very spare for the most part, like it would be in real life. The costumes are great. Christian Bale is giving a pretty decent performance.
Oh yeah, he's quite good in it.
Although the best performance for me was actually Toby Jones.
He was good. Timothy Spall not looking healthy. Mm-mm. Either he's lost a lot of weight on purpose or he's having some health problems.
Yeah. And I mean, I did, the costumes were great. Like the attention, I did appreciate the attention to historic detail. And I did notice, like you did, the references to the Poe stories. They're scattered throughout I wish they had signposted those more, because I don't know how many people, some people who watch this film are going to know Poe, but probably a lot of them won't. And so you can miss those. They might be a little too subtle.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, this was a disappointing movie.
It was well made, but very staid and by the books and
dreary.
Dreary is a great word.
Yeah, you said afterwards that it really should have been sleazier and just like, and you're right, it just should have been more fun. This was a good setup for some fun. I thought of many movies while we were watching it, like The Ninth Gate, Black Dahlia, Murder by Decree. All movies that delighted more in a sleazy kind of movie experience. This is just a little too classy and just not involved enough. Not enough mystery. No fun. This is not a fun.
No fun. And when you list out the premise and the elements and you take into account, like, we're talking about West Point and there's a secret club and there's black magic and Edgar Allan Poe is involved and it's a murder mystery. I mean, it's like, how does this not work? Because it really doesn't.
No.
It's you're right, disappointing and dreary.
Yeah, brutal.
Yeah. Oh well, we can't have everything in life. What do you want to talk about next?
I challenge the brilliant mind of Edgar Allan Poe, a game of wits. I will kill again, and on that corpse I will leave clues. We are in dire need unwholesome expertise. Are you up to the task, Mr. Poe?
My idea for a double feature, there's almost never been a more perfect idea by accident for a double feature. The Pale Blue Eye could almost be a direct prequel of a movie from, I think, 2012.
2012.
Called The Raven.
Yes.
Which is a James McTeague picture featuring, what's that guy's name that plays the detective in this one?
Luke Evans.
Luke Evans, who is one of those guys like James Marsden who may just be too traditionally handsome to ever actually make it unless he gets some kind of signature role. And he plays an investigator in Baltimore, and whereas in The Pale Blue Eye, it's the young Edgar Allan Poe, this, we're told in the beginning of the movie, are the final weeks of life of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes.
And Edgar Allan Poe once again becomes Watson in an investigation, though he's much more the lead in this movie, and he's played by the great John Cusack.
Yeah.
Not doing a southern accent at all.
No.
Just doing a John Cusack.
And thank God.
And John Cusack is electric in this movie. He's really maybe the best thing about it. And this movie is another murder mystery, but in this movie there's a mystery serial killer.
Yes.
And he's killing people in imitation of Edgar Allan Poe stories.
Yes, his stories and his poems. Let's, maybe the best way to start, since you did just mention John Cusack as the best thing about this film, which I agree with, by the way, maybe we should start by contrasting Harry Melling Poe and John Cusack Poe. Why is John Cusack Poe better?
It may be that John Cusack is just a better actor. It may also be the material.
Yeah, Harry Melling is a good actor. I'm not gonna take a dump on the guy.
No.
But for me, the big difference is personality.
And you know what? And one of the things that we'll get to, I guess, one thing the two movies have in common, we could say it now, is that in both movies he falls in love with a blonde woman.
Yep.
And there has perhaps never been a better romantic lead in the movies than John Cusack. And the scenes he has in this movie, it's Alice Eve as a society girl.
Yes, it
You
is.
believe how much he loves her. You want him to get the girl so badly.
I do believe how much he loves her. What I don't understand is why.
She's pretty. And she loves him.
And that's it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is, before we go any further, just to mention the cast of the movie.
Go for
because
it.
we talked about the other movie with all the Brits, but this one, has an all-American cast. John Cusack,
Brendan Gleeson.
Brendan Gleeson,
Not
that
American.
great American
Yeah,
actor,
yeah.
Brendan. I'm being totally sarcastic if it's not already clear. John Cusack is American. He's actually I think, the only major actor in this film who is.
Yeah, none of the other big guys are.
Yeah. We mostly have, I'm not going to say all British, because they're not all British. Brendan Gleeson, obviously. But all British Isles. Everybody is British or is English, Irish, Scottish. I think there's a Welshman in the cast. Definitely. We've got Luke Evans playing the inspector. Brendan Gleeson playing the antagonistic father of Alice Eve and one of the leaders
big rich guy.
Baltimore society guy. Yeah. There were a couple of treats. Before we started this episode, you were talking about an actor that you were now noticing in other things.
Oh, yeah.
And I had
David
that.
Harbour.
Yeah, and I had that experience with this. The sidekick policeman to the inspector.
Yes, he's become a face.
Oliver Jackson Cohen. And boy, when I saw him, I was so happy. Because literally, I had just finished watching The Haunting of Hill House a few months ago.
Yes, I remember when we started hanging out more.
Yeah.
You were watching it.
Yeah, and his face was right up in my mind. So I was happy to see him. Kevin McNally, who's probably best known to most of the people who'll be listening to this as Gibbs from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Who is he in this film?
He's the publisher.
Okay.
He's the publisher.
Who plays the publisher's assistant?
Sam Hazeldine?
Okay, and who plays the lackey of Brendan Gleeson?
Oh, that I don't remember.
I'm gonna have to look this up.
Yeah. One other actor I will mention, and boy, when I saw him come on screen, I was like, yes! Brendan Coyle, very briefly, as the barkeep.
Yes, he's quite good in the movie.
Yes, he's only got like one scene, but boy, does he play it well. And it's always nice to see Mr. Bates do something outside of Downton Abbey, especially, he wasn't particularly well used, I thought, the last few seasons of the show, and hasn't been well used in either movie. So it's nice to see him show up and get a few lines and have a chance to throw off a little of that, funny, but also like a serious tough guy character. I like that.
Dave Legano
Okay.
as Percy, the valet of Brendan Gleeson.
Okay.
So I guess to start the movie, we find out from the start that Poe died and no one knows what he did in his last few weeks of life.
Yes.
And so we know that that's where we are, and that sets us up also to know this movie might not have a happy ending. Mm-hmm. And then we go to the police are called in to investigate a murder in which the murderer has somehow fled from a room with a locked window.
Yes, it is the
locked door.
classic locked room mystery, and that's I actually have on my notes here for The Raven as I was watching this, because I had never seen this before. Before you said we're going to watch this for the podcast, my notes literally say, wow, shadows, motion, camera angles, depth of field, color. Just immediately, the movie's got me engaged in this murder mystery as the police are coming in to investigate, and they do all of the things that you think they would do. They hear the door being locked from the inside, so they know that someone had to be in the room after they busted the door down. The window is nailed shut, and they think, oh, could somebody have gotten up the chimney? No, because there's a body on the floor and a second one stuffed up the chimney. Mother and daughter, as it turns out. Then the Luke Evans character, Inspector Fields, I think it was, Emmett Fields.
Yes.
Comes on the scene, and he is immediately drawn to the window after trying every other possibility, and on a hunch, clearly remembering something from somewhere else, he pushes in a nail and the window springs open. The spring-loaded window that can be shut again from the outside.
And as much as the other movie is filmed in a classical not stagey, but very staid manner. Mm-hmm. It could almost be High Plains Drifter. This is a modern MTV flashbang Michael Bay style movie in a way.
Yeah.
And after watching Pale Blue Eye, happily so.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as to say Michael Bay, but James McTeague, V for Vendetta, obviously.
How do you feel about V for Vendetta?
I like some elements of it more than others. It's kind of a mixed bag for me, but overall a fairly positive one.
This movie, The Raven, makes me want to watch V for Vendetta. I've never seen it. It's one I've started a couple of times, and it didn't seem good to me, and so I turned it off before I could really even tell you what's going on, except for Guy Fawkes is involved.
Yeah, Guy Fawkes is involved. That is kind of the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, The Raven makes me want to see it.
But Guy Fawkes in a 1984, 21st century 1984 style dystopia.
It even reminded me of the beginning of the movie 1984, which is another movie I've never, I think, made it through.
Yeah.
Mark Rydell's 1984.
The book is better.
It seems like it must be. I've never read any George Orwell. I should.
Yeah.
I should.
How does Luke Evans... how does Inspector Fields know to probe the window? What is he remembering?
He's remembering a story. I don't remember which one.
It's the Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was brought up in Maniac. Mm-hmm. It's being like the murders in the Rue Morgue, the crimes in Maniac. Yeah, the murders in the Rue Morgue. Yeah. And so he knows that it's something based on Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah. And this is where we start spending a lot of time with Edgar Allan Poe, because this is a well-structured screenplay, and we are going to get time to know our main characters separately before they come together. This Edgar Allan Poe is just as obnoxious as Harry Melling's
And
Poe.
if anything, has become more full of himself.
Yeah, but that's because he's actually done something.
And he's even more of a drunkard. In fact, such a drunkard that he's exhausted all of his credit and has a bar tab that he can't pay at this bar he goes to, and is also a fan of using tinctures, we find out.
That's not fair. He did pay the bar tab and then couldn't get another drink because he pretty much
Yeah,
just had
his
enough
money
to pay the
had
bar
to
tab.
go towards. Yeah, he couldn't get any drinks because he had the money he has went toward his bar tab.
Yep.
Yeah, in where we meet your friend the bartender, and we get that other movie. Man, The Pale Blue Eyes just has no interest in West Point or 1830. It's not interested in much. This movie, we get those wonderful shots of the cash register inside and stuff.
Yes.
And it's just you're just like, oh man, this is the kind of stuff I go to the movies for.
Yeah,
These
you
little
are-
details.
You are like right in, and this is the other thing. I think Pale Blue Eye, of course, it's based on source material, and so I think it's the mistake of the story, though, is that it's Edgar Allan Poe before he becomes Edgar Allan Poe at a location that is not the location we associate with. Poe is not Poe outside of Baltimore.
I don't think that's the problem with the movie. I just think the movie's not interested in anything.
Well, and you do have a point about that, but for me, Baltimore, much like The Wire, in The Wire, Baltimore itself basically functions as another
In
character.
the John Waters film.
In this, or in John Waters films, functions as another character in the script, and you really get to know very, very different aspects of society, from the high class to the low class to the no class. There are so many things that this movie allows us to see. We go to a costume ball, an upper crusty costume, like a mask ball, where everyone is wearing those old, not domino masks, but the masks that only really cover the upper half
Yes.
of your face. We go to see a performance of a play, and we get to see backstage in the play, and we get to go all behind the scenes. There's this massive fire, which looked relatively real. I wonder if it was. We have a chase scene literally through the sewers of Baltimore. It's like there's action. Things are happening. There are set pieces. And all of them expose a little bit more about the city and the characters and advance the plot and provide you with some interesting visuals to break up the more dialogue-heavy scenes. Oh, so refreshing.
Yeah, so what happens in this bar is that we find out that Poe has already had successes, because we have a thing where he asks if anybody can finish a line from one of his poems, if
Quoth
he can get
the
it to
Raven.
and then somebody does deliver a nevermore.
Yep.
And not the first person who speaks up, but somebody does. So we know that people know Poe. And then we go to, he works for a newspaper and
Yes.
gets money for publishing things in a newspaper. And this is where we meet the publisher, and we meet the assistant and some other people at the paper. And they've decided not to publish one of Poe's things this month or this week or whatever. Today they're going to publish something by Longfellow, which really pisses John Cusack off.
Yeah, what is Edgar Allan Poe's opinion of Longfellow?
Longfellow.
Oh, to have a performance. Oh, to have an actor who's willing to... Never mind.
Yeah, the winner for Best Actor this week has got to be John Cusack. He just tears this movie up.
Yeah.
He's so much fun. And I think there could just be a whole podcast of all the fun movies John Cusack has been in over the years. He's one of our most underrated stars for just overall longevity of quality of films.
He is, isn't he? And it's
He's in
kind
a
of
lot of good movies.
He is. When I think of John Cusack, immediately I go to High Fidelity. Like, that's just the number one off the top of my head. But you're right, he's been in a ton. And he's been in this, which I remember seeing trailers for, and it looked vaguely interesting, but I never got to the theater to see it before it, went away.
Yeah, I don't think it was a hit.
No, it was
May
not.
have contributed to why we don't see John Cusack movies.
That's a possibility,
Anymore.
which is such a shame.
Yeah, I've heard that, or I read somewhere that he's kind of anti-superhero movie, and he's not willing to take on a small role in one of those as like General Hoppinscotch and revive his career that way,
And
which
you know-
also hurts it.
More power to him.
Yeah, I guess.
He's going to make his choices, and that's okay. After we've been introduced to Luke Evans as Inspector Fields and John Cusack as Edgar Allan Poe, we also have intercut with a really grisly scene.
We find out that he hasn't been published because there's a critic that doesn't like his work that they're publishing instead of what he's written as well, named
Ludwig Griswold.
Ludwig Griswold.
And how how much do you know about Edgar Allan Poe?
Very little.
Okay, so this one is kind of a satisfying deep cut for people who are familiar. Griswold, the critic in the movie, is based on a real person, also surnamed Griswold, who sometimes wrote under the pen name of Ludwig, who was one of Poe's... How do I describe this best? He was kind of the guy who served as the gatekeeper for who was a real American poet. In the 1840s.
I had no idea.
That's what he wanted to be anyway, and he basically published a kind of who's who in American poetry anthology. He did, in a couple of his volumes, include a few of Poe's poems as selections, but they developed a little bit of a rivalry. Poe did not like Griswold. Griswold did not like Poe, and after Poe died, Griswold published an anonymous obituary in a New York paper that got picked up and carried all over the country, which was a complete hatchet job on Poe's life, his legacy, his reputation, the quality of his artistry, and to top all of that off, he then somehow managed to convince people that he had been named Poe's literary executor, and so released editions of his book, like collections of his stories and poems, where he ended up trashing Poe in the foreword. So to watch this guy, and this is a spoiler, but it's a very mild one because the movie goes on long past this, Griswold gets Pit in the Pendulum to death.
And when this is also when we realize this movie's a little ridiculous with but in a fun way.
Yeah.
In the machination of the pendulum is just like, you're like, who can afford this?
And Poe himself, like when he sees the mechanisms, the top is so much heavier than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I did not imagine the counterweight.
It was great. But watching Griswold get cut in half was just so deeply satisfying.
And you know immediately it's going to turn out to be Griswold. And that's going to make Poe a suspect. But then he reveals he never actually met Griswold, but they had a literary feud.
Yes.
So I had no idea this backstory. That does make it all the more delicious.
Oh, doesn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
It makes the movie better, and the movie could stand to be a little better. We are talking it up, but it's not. This is not a cinematic masterpiece.
No, this is a solid movie.
Yes.
This is it's well constructed.
It's fun.
It's well paced. It's a lot of fun. And it includes, like The Pale Blue Eye does, a lot of references to Poe stories. But if you've never read Poe stories, here they are signposted.
Oh, yes.
And they are explained for you by the author himself, which, again, to me, that's another choice that this movie makes right. If you're not familiar with Poe, but you pick this up just for the fun of it, this
kind of educates you, might get you interested.
It does. This might make you actually, like, read The Raven, read Annabel Lee, read The Pit and the Pendulum, or The Cask of Amontillado, or The Mask of the Red Death, and you know, the one thing I really miss, it's not one of Poe's best stories, but I was so hoping to get, since they seem to be bringing in so many things, like they even brought in The Mysterious Case of M. Valdemar, and I was so hoping that they would bring in a reference to my personal favorite Poe short story, again, not one of his best, called Never Bet the Devil Your Head, which is just a build-up to a gag. I don't know if it would actually work anywhere other than on paper, but I've read that thing like 24 times over the years.
Did they include it?
No. It's a one disappointment. This is a terrible movie because they did not include the Poe story in it that only I like.
You know, it's not signposted in this movie, and we won't go into it too much because I think part of the fun of the movie is... Part of the fun, but also something they could have maybe done better, is that this movie does have red herring suspects, but you kind of have to make them for yourself. And then the people you start to suspect are slowly eliminated towards the end of the movie or winnowed down. Like, you're like, okay, this guy's not going to be it. This guy's not going to be it. But they could have done a better job signposting people. And in fact, this is one of my complaints about the movie, in that much like Christian Bale in the other movie, I don't know how good of a detective Luke Evans is. There's not much following up on like, hey, well, who would have motives? Who can we question here? Once they get past suspecting Cusack, Edgar Allan Poe, they pretty much never come up with another suspect. They just follow the killer's clues that he's leaving for them, and so there's constantly a step behind.
And that is true. However, and I will say this, when the killer is ultimately revealed, when Poe comes face to face with the person who did it all.
By then I was down to 2 suspects, and pretty much they solve it for you,
Yeah, they really do, but also not a character you would have noticed much. I mean, he's believably hidden.
Yeah, which makes his motive a little...
Yeah, so there's... Yeah, how can you look for the motive in that case?
Yeah.
And I will say that although this movie is structurally solid, there's enough to get you from one set piece to the next set piece. The last twist that leads Poe to his face-to-face encounter with the killer is a tiny bit weak. More than a tiny bit weak. I am being a little generous because I did like this movie quite a bit.
After the first night of action is when we meet Alice Eve and her dad. Percy lets Poe into their carriage, or stops the carriage for him, even though he probably shouldn't. And Poe goes inside and starts hitting on Alice Eve, and Brendan Gleeson's having none of it. Mm-hmm. But he slips a thing to Alice Eve, and she goes and meets him later. Also, Poe's publisher has told him if he wants to make some money, he needs to write another Telltale Heart, and he feels like he's all written out pretty much and can't come up with another Telltale Heart, but he's actually examining a heart to try to think of ideas. And we also meet Poe's pet raccoon.
Yeah, Carl, one of the best ideas in the movie.
There's a great thing with Carl later, one of the best lines of the movie. The movie does give Cusack some good lines, and so I thought one of the differences between he and Melling is just the material. Like, they give Cusack some funny lines in this.
That is part of it, but a more fundamental part, and again, this is not knocking Harry Melling, is just the characterization in the script. Like, this Edgar Allan Poe has done a lot. He's earned his ego, but he's also to the point where he does feel washed up and he's having trouble continuing on. It's a darker sort of a picture, which kind of befits the material, honestly. And Cusack really gets a lot out of it.
Once they determine that Cusack is not the murderer of Griswold, then he's now Watson. They're going to use him to help solve these murders, and there's a clue left that leads them to believe that Brendan Gleeson, who holds this big masked ball is going to serve as the staging of a murder based on the Mask of the Red Death.
Yep.
And so the police, they want to beef up security at this ball. Brendan Gleeson's main concern is not keeping people out of the ball, not even having a guest list, apparently, but just keeping John Cusack out. Though he doesn't want the police in as well. He doesn't want them fouling it up with shit on their shoes as he talks. So he doesn't want to turn into a policeman's ball.
Yeah.
He plays a real jerk.
He really does. He is a very high-class gentleman. You understand, Captain Hamilton.
He's also one of my favorite actors. In the 90s, I would go see just about everything in the late 90s that came out of the theater. Mm-hmm. And that would be my way of having fun and spending my money, pretty much was just going to see everything. And I would go see movies not even knowing what they were sometimes. And I wandered into a movie with a classmate called The General by John Borman. And I had no idea what this was about. I assumed it was about a military general. And it turned out to be based on a true story of an Irish thief known as The General. And it's like an epic movie starring Brendan Gleeson as this Irish thief that was big in the 70s and 80s, I guess, and then killed probably by the IRA. And it was a fantastic movie, and ever since then, Brendan Gleeson has been one of my favorite actors. He's nominated, maybe tonight is Hollywood's biggest night, Tuesday, the night of the Golden Globes.
I know.
And Brendan Gleeson's nominated for a movie I watched a couple of days ago, Banshees of Inisherin.
Yeah, still haven't seen that. I am so far behind on my movies I missed that will undoubtedly be nominated for everything list, but Banshees is on there.
I preferred The Raven.
Oh, ouch. Because I've seen that make so many top 10 lists that Banshees has.
Yeah, The Banshees of Inisherin is a movie that's pretty much just for actors, and I knew, and it's very smart. It's very well done. It could be a play. The acting is fantastic, but I knew that I was in trouble within a few shots of the movies when they were these rack focuses through windows and stuff. I was like, oh man, this movie's not going to be any fun at all, and it sure isn't.
That is too bad.
Yeah, just not a fun movie.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Luke Evans does convince what's his face,
Gleason, Captain Hamilton.
Captain Hamilton, to let them to police be interspersed in the crowd to look for a disturbance at this ball. We also get that Edgar Allan Poe earns money by teaching a poetry class to society ladies.
Gosh, this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Yes, where the woman reads a poem about a butterfly and a bee.
Yeah, and it is so sad and so basic. And he obviously, because he needs the money, he turns it around and starts talking about the mechanization of society
and making the bee a honey maker.
And you've really struck something here, ma'am. It's brilliant. It's terrifying, but it's brilliant. You just know from the look on that woman's face that she is going to spend the next 2 weeks at her society gatherings, very modestly. Well, these ideas just come to me.
And the Edgar Allan Poe himself praised my poem. You have to hear it now. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Aren't I such a deep thinker?
But another thing about that thing is that one of the people in the class is Alice Eve.
Yep.
And she can see exactly what Edgar Allan Poe's doing, and it adds to their love story.
And she is the only one in the room, which is great.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Who sees through him.
Yeah. Alice Eve is fine. She's fine in this movie. I did think she was kind of the weak link in the cast when everything was said and done. But this is a pretty strong cast. That's not necessarily a knock.
No, you're right. She's no Brendan Gleeson.
Well, who is?
True.
So, at this party, at this big masked ball, which Poe has snuck into, which the policemen are guarding, the killer does indeed invade with a distraction which draws
a big diversion.
Yeah, and everybody's attention goes to that. He knows that the police are going to be watching for it, clearly. And in all of the tumult and hubbub of the distraction, he kidnaps Emily. He kidnaps Poe's lady love. And now it's not just, can we catch the serial killer? It's, can we catch the serial killer not only before he kills again, but before Emily dies? And this gives Poe some really nice personal stakes that Cusack, again, plays to the hilt. I love that.
Yeah, and it puts a clock on the movie, too.
It really does.
Yeah.
Right when it needs it, too.
Yes. And it gives Brendan Gleeson more to do and keeps him involved in the movie. So he has to have guilt over even throwing this party, and then he wants to blame Cusack for the daughter getting kidnapped. Another killing happens, which is discovered. Oh man, this movie's called The Raven. How many ravens do we see in this movie? You'd think Baltimore is just a raven haven.
Well, it is. Haven't you watched any football lately?
Yeah, because they have the Ravens. Yeah, you're right.
No, but you're right. There are, literally from the first shot of the movie all the way to the end.
That's one thing. They hit the hammer hard on Ravens. CG Ravens galore.
Good. There's some style here.
Yes, there is style. Maybe you want to watch more James McTeague movies.
Yeah, he has.
I've never seen any of his others.
He started out as like an assistant on Dark City. And,
oh yes,
he worked
with a lot of style.
He worked for the Wachowskis on The Matrix. He was at V for Vendetta. I want to say that was his first film. I'm not completely sure.
Then he had a movie called like Ninja Assassin or something like that, which I kind of want to see now.
Yeah, and I think this was just his third feature.
Yeah, and then I think he maybe got to make one more, and he's never been allowed. Now he works on video games or something.
Which is really disappointing. One thing I do want to make sure that I bring up, you brought up the relatively high cost of Pale Blue Eye. I did look up the budget for the Raven.
I was hoping we'd do this.
Yes. Do you know how much the Raven cost?
Idea.
About a third.
Now, there's been inflation.
25, but not that much. You're right. I know we've gone through an inflationary period.
The Raven looks like it costs 5 times more than the Pale Blue Eye.
And The Raven was made for $25 million.
Wow.
Which is amazing. So it occurred to me, how do you make a movie for $25 million like with this? And none of these guys, look, except for John Cusack, who is definitely not among Hollywood's absolute A-list.
Yeah, he's
stars.
not as hyped as Christian Bale is now.
Yeah, you've got a lot of very solid, capable actors below him, but no one who, commands like a big paycheck. That is part of it. Luke Evans, Gaston himself, and Brendan Gleeson.
But maybe before he was
This was
Yeah.
before the Emma Watson Beauty and the Beast, yeah. But that was what was going through my mind.
Yeah, me too, because I think that's the only thing I know him from.
Yeah. How do you make a movie for $25 million? This was going through my head when I was watching the movie, and then in the closing credits, I started to notice a lot of names that looked very unusual. Slavic names. And I immediately, okay, I got you now. Now I know what you did. And in fact, the bulk of this, it's set in Baltimore, but the bulk of the movie was apparently filmed in Serbia and some in Hungary.
Unlike Pale Blue Eye, which was shot in Pennsylvania, and led you to noticing a conspicuous, or not, I guess, a cameo in the film. Who was in the movie Pale Blue Eye?
Well, I can't take any credit for noticing this because I didn't notice it in the movie, but apparently the former lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania and the current junior senator John Fetterman and his wife are extras in the film for a brief scene. And I don't know how I missed him because John Fetterman is a huge guy. He's like 6'6". I don't know how I missed the guy, but I did.
So do you think a good portion of the budget of that film is some kind of pork barrel political graft?
Ooh.
Kickbacks, slush funds.
What a tempting theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'd be more inclined to believe that a larger part of the Ravens' smaller budget went to grease the notoriously anti-American palms of some of the lower level apparatchiks in the Serbian government, honestly.
I refuse to believe that.
Okay. But man, it's again, solid cast, great costumes, great world building.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, a wonderful sense of visual style and some color. There was color in this movie. Who would have thought?
Which is a lot of black and white kind of colors, but then yeah, you're right. There was more color even than in Pale Blue Eye.
Oh yeah, much more. And just the general overall level of action and movement and the structure between the set pieces. The Raven is by far the better film.
So I guess what we get to get back to the plot, we get it, our third murder, which turns out, we think at first it's a prostitute, but turns out it's an actress, as Edgar Allan Poe notices. They notice that the blood is stage blood.
Yes.
So this leads them to thinking that the killer must have something to do with this stage production of Macbeth that's going on. And they go and investigate, find out who's on the crew of this Macbeth. They never really look at a guest list of the party or try to find out, or there's very little actual investigation going on here. There is something we get Luke Evans noticing that the ink the killer uses is magnetized.
Yes.
Which he doesn't really follow up on.
He does. That's what gets him.
Not till
the end.
It takes him a long time for this to occur to him to get back to following clues.
You are correct about that. I mean, and the Macbeth connection is a little weak too. They literally hypothesize that because the blood is on her hands.
Yes.
Out, damned spot. The
Yes.
famous Lady Macbeth monologue. You're right. The detective aspects of the detective story could use a little work. This is really more of a buddy cop.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's a good buddy cop.
Yeah.
And the relationship is a good one.
Especially John Cusack.
Yep. He really does make this movie his own.
They go and they investigate the crew of this stage production, which leads them on their first chase around in this backstage of this play because they determine that the killer must be there somewhere. Then they start looking for this missing crewman, Maurice. Someone is leading them on a chase in the flies and things of this theater, but they don't get him.
Yes, and does it turn out to be Maurice?
No.
Oh.
But we find out through a clue based on Cask of Amontillado, which also makes them start looking for tunnels and things that could be walled up so they could inter someone, Cask of Amontillado, or it's not like think of it Maniac style. Mm-hmm. This is where you find out once again from Edgar Allan Poe that Baltimore does not have tunnels, but it has this whole underground water system or something.
This is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about the chase through the sewers of Baltimore.
Yes.
Yeah, the hunting for Emily, who they think may be walled up in the sewers, and they do not find Emily.
And this is where my first red herring killer that I started to suspect was eliminated, because we see a glimpse of the killer and my first red herring is on the opposite side of the wall from him. But then he gets away from them again. He eludes them again. And then someone has set John Cusack's house on fire. This is where we have the big fire scene with the fire department. And this has one of my favorite lines. They found this raccoon and they think maybe it might be Edgar Allan Poe's. And Edgar Allan Poe says, yes, I'm sure it's mine. I can tell by his voice.
These are the little touches that did make me fall in love with this movie, probably more than its level of quality actually warrants. But I like a movie that understands that there are some things that you can just throw away and have a little
Throwaway
fun
lines make a movie better, for sure.
They do. And have a little fun with it.
Unfortunately, to go back to the movie Amsterdam, throwaway lines are the best part of the movie by far.
Yes.
Then there are some excellent ones in the movie Amsterdam. Like, I got many a good chuckle out of that movie.
Yeah.
But then the rest of their movie, everything else sucked.
Yeah, I mean, the throwaway line should be like the sprinkles on the sundae.
Yes.
And Amsterdam is
Just
like
some sprinkles.
95% sprinkles in terms of the good things about it.
Yes. Yeah, I wish that it had been 95% sprinkles based on how good the sprinkles were.
Yeah.
I would have rather just a bowl of sprinkles.
Yeah. Well, it was 95% sprinkles, but they were in a thimble.
Amsterdam was an involved mystery, much in the same way this movie is, and The Pale Blue Eye, but you called it was just so sloppy.
Yeah.
It felt like the first draft of that mystery.
Yeah, it really was a shame.
And Christian Bale was excellent in it.
Yeah.
His house has been burned down. He needs lodgings, and I forget where he even goes. I think
He goes to Fields. He moves in with
his
Fields.
buddy.
And I was like, oh, now we're going to have an odd couple dynamic. And there wasn't...
Doesn't really play out.
No, there wasn't as much of that as I had hoped for just from the immediate setup.
No. They're finding out about the Cask of Amontillado. Did we bring in Brendan Gleeson once again, because apparently he has all these nautical maps they need to use. That's the only place they can go to find them is at Brendan Gleeson's house. And we also get mentioned that the way that... who's the actor you said plays the assistant? The cop assistant?
Oh, Oliver Jackson Cohen.
Oliver Jackson Cohen determines from the tattoo on this corpse they find there's been another murder connected, that it's dealing with longitude and latitude. The criminal is giving them some kind of clue based on longitude and latitude, and knows this from his military experience. And this also brings up John Cusack understands it because, of course, Edgar Allan Poe went to West Point.
Which he notes in the film before saying, don't worry, I was expelled.
And when Edgar Allan Poe is a suspect early in the film, one of the people they interrogate is his publisher, who tells them Poe's not a killer, he's just a man haunted by every woman he ever loved dying in his arms. Yeah. Which also calls back to The Pale Blue Eye.
Yes.
So we get many ways that this is a perfect double feature for The Pale Blue Eye, and that they could just be a series.
Yeah, and the only thing he's ever killed is a bottle of brandy.
Yes.
Which again, I love. That was a nice twist. I noticed that the people who wrote The Raven, Ben Livingston, who's more known as an actor, I think this is his only writing credit, and Hannah Shakespeare, who
wrote Macbeth.
Yes, that's right. No, not even close. But she did write at least one episode of the Playboy Club.
I don't know that.
I don't either.
Do
you remember when the Playboy Club was on? Because no one else does
by
either.
Actors. Scott Cooper, who makes these macho movies, also was an actor.
That's right.
Which reminds me of the Hollywood King Taylor Sheridan's acting career.
Yeah, I totally forgot about Scott Cooper's acting career.
Yeah.
Oof. Sorry about that.
Yeah, he and Taylor Sheridan are kind of similar. A lot of actors become writers and directors.
I can understand that. You spend a lot of time delivering someone else's dialogue. You probably get a feel for it, a handle on it, and then you want to try it yourself.
Oh yeah, it's one of the most understandable things there is.
Yeah.
They go to Brendan Gleeson's house, and now he's on their side helping them. And they figure out that it's not a place out at sea, it's pointing to St. Croix, and they decide that there's a cross church.
Yes, Holy Cross Church.
Holy Cross Church, yes. And so they go there looking for Alice Eve, and this ends up with a big shootout climax of the movie, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't catch him, and this leads to Edgar Allan Poe, who has been writing to the criminal throughout. I guess this whole thing has led to many stories by Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, he's been writing, he has been writing to the criminal. He's been writing to the city of Baltimore, though. This is part of the deal, is that in order to keep Emily alive, Poe has to write his experiences and get them published in the Baltimore Patriot, which is the paper that he didn't get published in at the beginning. And so...
Which also creates another one of our suspects.
It does. And the killer basically says, I will be reading the Patriot, and if you don't deliver, then...
Emily's dead.
Emily's dead. None of these passages, I think, that John Cusack comes up with, his little monologues, I don't think these are taken from anything by Poe, but they certainly sound like something Poe would have written. They did a good job with that.
That's always fun, when the writer can do, or in this case writers, can do a good job of imitating the writer they're trying to imitate.
With Edgar Allan Poe especially, he's got such a specific and well-known voice that you have to get that right. And they do. They do.
Another movie that the Pale Blue Eye and novel that it really reminded me of the setup was The Name of the Rose. And I think like Timothy Spall was basically playing the Michael Lonsdale character, and if you know The Name of the Rose, it makes you think that Pale Blue Eye is going to add up to a lot more than it actually does once again. But one of the things in Name of the Rose is they imitate the writing of Aristotle. Umberto Eco does in the novel, and they might put a little of it in the movie, and he does a fantastic job of imitating how Aristotle might have written another book on comedy.
Well, if he's not the greatest novelist of the 20th century, that was because he wasn't Russian.
That's the only Umberto Eco book I've read. I would read more.
But it's really good.
It was good.
Yeah. So, what else do we have to say about the rape?
We get our other suspects eliminated, except for really one until the very end, for me. The prime one, the guy who I really thought was the killer, turns out not to be the killer. Mm-hmm. And we find out the killer is. Cusack's final thing that he wants to write for the paper is finally a plea saying, like, look, kill me, let Emily live. And so we have a setup for how ultimately, spoiler, he dies.
Yep.
Cusack, as Edgar Allan Poe, dies, and...
Wait, Edgar Allan Poe is dead?
Yes, which we found out at the beginning of the movie, so that's not much of a spoiler.
When
However,
did this happen? I haven't checked my phone all day. Never mind.
What I learned afterwards is the way in which Cusack's... We don't know what Edgar Allan Poe's real last words were. No one was there when he died that we know of, but we do know that someone ran into him not long before he died, and he said pretty much more or less what he says in the movie.
He kept repeating the name.
Apparently out of his mind, saying the word. We end with Edgar Allan Poe in the movie, and then the crime is solved. Emily lives and Edgar Allan Poe dies.
Yep.
Spoiler, but it's the kind of movie where you kind of know that's what's going to happen.
Yep.
I don't think that's much of a spoiler.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the somewhat unfortunate coda where we find out that the killer didn't end up getting away with it exactly.
It's a little, like, far-fetched tidy in a far-fetched movie.
Yeah.
It didn't bother me.
It did end the movie on kind of a shaky note for me, but it didn't. At that point, it didn't matter. The story had been told, the dues had been paid. I'd had a good time, and
it's a silly enough movie that if they hadn't have wrapped it up in some way where the killer gets caught, I would have been a little bit like, some movies earn a really downbeat or ambiguous ending. This was such a propulsive Hollywood action film that I would have been a little taken aback. I don't know, maybe, talk to me if I saw the other version of the movie. It was like, whoa, he got away with it? That's crazy. But to me, I was not disappointed at all that justice was in the end served. I might have been sad if it hadn't been, I think.
No, and I can understand that. I think that's a reason. I just thought that it was a little cheesy. but then The
I
Raven.
want to point out how great the pleats are, the weird pleats are on John Cusack's shirt, on the tops of his sleeves. How would you like a shirt like that? I would not.
I would not either.
But I thought about some other movies, as I usually do, picking aside from the mysteries we mentioned, which I thought would all more or less just go to show up The Pale Blue Eye, and I didn't feel like doing that. I really considered two Todd Haynes films, The Velvet Goldmine, which featured a younger Christian Bale in a movie about glam rock, because the title The Pale Blue Eye is also the title Pale Blue Eyes of a Lou Reed song, who was a glam rocker who loved Edgar Allan Poe and enough that he made a double album based on Edgar Allan Poe stories and poems. And then similarly, Todd Haynes' most recent film, I believe, is a 2021 documentary about the band The Velvet Underground. And I think it's a fantastic movie. It's not just about the rock band, but about the scene in 60s Soho, New York, and just about Andy Warhol and New York history and American history and the history of rock and roll and different perspectives. The Velvet Underground were a very different take on late 60s rock and roll from what you usually hear on the radio. And this movie offers a very different perspective on what you usually see in a 60s rock and roll doc about a band, and I recommend both movies, but the documentary on the Velvet Underground is quite good. However, ultimately, I just couldn't think of any better choice than this movie, which, you know, if you watch it after Pale Blue Eye, just seems like a sequel to The Pale Blue Eye.
Yeah, it really does. And a better
Yeah, I think it's a much better movie.
a better sequel. So thumbs, at least from me, thumbs way up to The Raven.
I think you might have even liked it more than me.
I liked it more than it objectively deserves. I admit that. But when a movie is actually fun and has a little sense of style and, you know...
It's a good, dumb, fun movie.
Exactly.
Maybe not even that dumb,
Exactly.
but a little dumb.
Exactly. It's becoming a rarer thing to see like a low to mid budget movie that even manages to rise to like this level of solid. And so maybe I am being a little more affectionate than it deserves.
Yeah,
But
it doesn't cheat you.
no, it does not.
The Pale Blue Eye cheats you.
It was a real joy to watch. So thumbs up to which order would you watch these in?
I'd watch them in with the young Poe first, then the old Poe. Like I'd watch it like he lived through the Pale Blue Eye story, and now he's an older man and gets involved in another series of murders.
Good. I think that's a good order. I get thumbs up to The Raven and thumbs up to that double feature if you have to include the Pale Blue Eye. Thumbs up to
yeah.
thumbs up to that double feature.
Yeah, we might be better off with just the two latter movies this time.
Honestly, we might. Speaking of which, I guess that brings us to my selection.
But another beer, sir,
But
please.
another beer first.
I'm gonna love you for the rest of my life.
Just love me for the rest of mine.
You know how I think we should proceed? I should grind me up some OxyContin and have a little snort.
Everyone in this town is going crazy. I think it's because of me and these horns.
You killed that innocent girl. Now the devil has claimed you.
To introduce the back half of my double feature, because I'm also going to put the Pale Blue Eye first, I think it's only fair that I start by explaining why I got
Please do.
to the movie I did.
I think you're going to have to.
Yep, I will. So, as we were walking out of the theater, of course, I talked about maybe picking The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which we've both seen, which we both really like.
Yeah.
And I did that specifically for the Harry Melling connection. I also talked about The Black Coat's Daughter as kind of a Lucy Boynton
I haven't seen.
connection, which you haven't seen, but it's a pretty solid film. And then I joked offhandedly about picking Thor: Love and Thunder.
Which I haven't seen, so I didn't know it was a joke.
But the minute I said Thor: Love and Thunder, and just so we're clear, Thor: Love and Thunder is not my pick, just people in internet land. I was looking for a movie that felt like the opposite of everything that the Pale Blue Eye was to me as I walked out of the theater. And don't make any mistake, Thor 4 is a deeply stupid movie. Deeply stupid. But it's also bright and garish, and there are some jokes, although a lot of them don't land, but there are some jokes, and they move well. I was kind of inclined toward it because there is a sort of thematic connection around Christian Bale between Thor: Love and Thunder and The Pale Blue Eye, and to say more would kind of spoil The Pale Blue Eye, so we'll leave it at that. I wasn't totally satisfied with that, and I really didn't want to watch Thor 4 either. I came home and I did some research and I did a lot of thinking, and the movie I ended up selecting was Horns from 2013.
A movie I'd never even heard of.
Yes. Have you? I bet you have heard of the author, though. Have you ever read any Joe Hill?
No, I'm not. I wasn't familiar with Joe Hill either.
No 20th Century Ghosts, no Heart-Shaped Box.
I have no idea what these are. I
but
do know Daniel Radcliffe was in the Harry Potter movies with Harry Melling.
Wait, was Daniel Radcliffe in the Harry Potter movies?
At least a couple of them.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the things you forget when you don't see these films for so long. Yeah, Radcliffe was one of the reasons I ultimately did go with this, because of the Harry Potter connection. Yeah, I'm going to confess that was part of it. But I want to start by talking about Joe Hill and the book he wrote that I haven't read, but on which Horns is based. So I bet you do know Joe Hill's dad, though. In fact, I bet you've seen Joe Hill and you don't realize it. Have you seen Creepshow?
When I was a kid, I've seen Creepshow. I don't really remember it.
Then you've seen Joe Hill.
Okay.
Because he is the child actor who's in the wraparound
Okay, sure.
story.
I remember that there's the wraparound.
But he's credited by his actual name.
Joseph Hill?
Well, no. His full name is Joseph Hillstrom King.
Oh, so he's Stephen King's boy.
He's Stephen King's son. And he started writing under the pen name Joe Hill because he didn't want everybody to think that he got published because of who his dad was. Which I read 20th Century Ghosts without knowing who he was. I picked it up literally just because it was recommended at a local independent bookstore I went to. And it's a collection of his short stories, and they're really solid. Really, really good. They actually reminded me a lot of Stephen King while I read them before I knew the connection, but different. And then there's also, I picked up his first novel, Heart-Shaped Box, which isn't quite as good, but I think that's because it's at length. It was a very satisfying read. I enjoyed the book quite a bit. It didn't have the punch as a few of the short stories in 20th Century Ghosts.
It also shares a title with a rock song.
Yeah.
Much like Pale Blue Eye.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a relation. Stephen King and Joe Hill, they love their music.
Though Stephen King wasn't involved in the Pale Blue Eye.
That we know of. And I hope Joe Hill wasn't much involved in Horns either.
Had you seen Horns before?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is part of the reason I guess before we kick off, just give me a general impression of Horns, because you've never seen it before.
It was sleazy.
Yep.
And some of the sleaziness I liked, we'll get to that, and some of it I really didn't like. In fact, there is a point about 10 minutes in, maybe about 10 minutes into Horns, a sequence begins that almost made me turn off the movie.
I think I know the one you're talking about.
But then I didn't. I finished the movie, and at some point the movie picks up and does a few things I thought were kind of cool. Mm-hmm. And then there were things in the movie I liked, but then by the end, I didn't really enjoy the movie because I felt like the mystery kind of solves itself in the beginning, especially, well, we can get into the movie after we get into the...
And I've got no problem spoiling all of this.
Oh, okay. If you want to spoil it, go for it.
I don't have a problem, because I did not pick Horns because it was a good movie. I'm aware that it's not, in fact.
I've seen worse.
You have seen worse. The Pale Blue Eye is a very workmanlike film. It's a technically good film, but it is dull. And Horns is a mess. But there's one thing that you can't say about it. It's not dull.
No, a lot happens.
It's loud, it's garish, there is no subtext either. Like, everyone is really just saying whatever it is that they're thinking or feeling, which is actually part of the premise.
Yes.
But we'll get into that. So, and of course there's the Daniel Radcliffe connection, who is our main character in the movie. He plays the unusually named Ignatius Parrish.
Yes. I wonder if there's some religious.
If you are listening to this and your last name is Parrish,
And
never
you're not the center Robert Parrish.
Yeah, never name your kid something that you might call a Catholic church. It's just not going to go well. So Ignatius Parrish, Saint Ignatius,
Yeah.
Saint Ignatius Parrish, we'll call him Iggy, as everyone in the film calls him. We open up on him in the aftermath of a tragedy.
No, we open up on him
yes.
with Juno Temple in
Yes.
a field. And I love Juno Temple, and I liked her in this movie. We have a thing where they're very much in love. Their heads are together as they lie in the grass in this field. And he says, I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. And she says, just love me for the rest of mine.
That's right.
Which I knew we were in trouble because that's the catchphrase from the John Travolta movie Phenomenon. And when you're plagiarizing the movie Phenomenon, you're in trouble.
Yeah, you really are.
And here's the spoiler on where we go with the movie. The movie wants you to forget you've heard that. So remembering the movie Phenomenon is a real drawback to your enjoyment of the movie Horns. Because not only do you know they plagiarized them, you also know the twist in the movie.
But don't you feel like the bookend scenes were just so satisfying? It's okay to answer no, because they were not.
No. But where we go after that, to me, all of a sudden the movie, I was like, oh, maybe this will be good, because then we go to a time where the tragedy is we know immediately.
Yes.
That and we don't need to be told, which is a good piece of filmmaking. I don't know who directed this movie.
Alexandra Aha.
The sadness of this scene with Daniel, after she says, love me for the rest of mine, then he's alone in his home, and he goes and puts on the David Bowie Heroes album and Heroes song. You know immediately she's dead.
Yes.
And they don't need to tell you. And then we get a surprise. He opens up his blinds, and there are protesters all outside.
Protesters and journalists.
And then we have a nifty piece of filmmaking where he slows down the record of Heroes with his finger, and it puts all the people outside into slow motion. And I was like, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's a little bit of stylization. Before this, Aha had done The Hills Have Eyes.
Which you didn't see.
Like the remake of
Yeah,
the Wes
I haven't
Craven.
seen any of his
Obviously,
movies,
Wes
so-
Craven did the original.
Yes.
He'd
Which I also
also
didn't see.
he'd also written a kind of a cheaper little horror film called P2 starring Rachel Nichols, which is one of the ones I own mostly because I like Rachel Nichols.
From Star Trek.
Yes, or I would have known her from The Inside at the time.
I think of her. So that's not who plays Uhura?
No, she's the Green Orion. You're thinking of Zoe Saldana.
No. Who plays Uhura on the old Star Treks?
Oh, you're thinking Nichelle Nichols.
Nichelle
Oh,
Nichols. Yes.
no. Okay, so the reason I got confused just then is because Rachel Nichols actually is in the 2009 Star Trek movie.
Oh, wow.
And she plays Uhura's roommate in
Whoa.
Starfleet Academy.
Whoa, real Nichols fest. The Nichols Fellowship, as they call it.
Yes, the Fellowship of the Nichols. Like, this is gonna be so bad. All right, so yes, we open up. We find out that Juno Temple's character Marin is dead, and Ig is suspected of her murder.
So apparently she's been murdered, and everyone thinks he did it.
Everyone thinks he did it. His family thinks he did it.
Here we meet some famous actors as his parents.
Yes.
And we meet his brother.
Yes.
Who play his parents? We've got
James Remar.
James Remar, whom I love.
Yep.
But is not very good in this movie.
No.
I was so disappointed. You know, we did High Plains Drifter last time, and when we hung out a few weeks ago, we talked a little bit about the movie Django Unchained, and I watched about half of Django Unchained. Literally after we hung out that night, I went home and watched half of it, which, by the way, is such a good movie. It makes, as much as I enjoyed High Plains Drifter, it makes High Plains Drifter look like it was made by children. But James Remar plays a double role in Django Unchained.
Yep.
And is quite good. I love James Remar, but he's so bad in this. I was thinking about, like, people that do drugs that are creative, they're afraid that, like, if they quit the drugs, their creativity will go away. It's kind of a cliche, right?
Yes.
But this never happens. What usually happens is you just live longer. You live a more happy, productive life if you quit drugs. However, James Remar may be our only case of someone who got way worse after he quit drugs. It's like he used to be so fun in 80s and 70s movies, and now he's just like this stolid, handsome guy who's worth nothing.
Well, have you ever read anything Stephen King wrote after like the mid-90s?
No, so I guess maybe Stephen King is the other example?
He might be. Sorry, Stephen.
Oh.
Yeah, I love early King. Late King he can be a chore. So
And
everyone,
then Kathleen Quinlan is his
Kathleen
mom.
Quinlan. Yep, that is correct.
She fares a little better.
Just a little bit, though.
Then he has an older brother
Yes,
whom plays a horn.
that is true. Joe Anderson plays Iggy's older brother Terry, who is in a jazz band, right?
Yeah, and I feel like he looked familiar, but I wasn't really sure where I knew him from.
Well,
he might just look like a lot of handsome guys.
I ran across him first in Across the Universe.
Didn't see it.
Yeah, I kind of liked Across the Universe, again, maybe more than it deserved. He was in The Ruins. He was in The Grey. No? None of this
So
ring
maybe
a
I
bell?
haven't seen him.
No. Okay. He's a working actor. Also English. We have a lot of
Interesting.
English actors here. In fact, the lead 4 actors in this film are British as well, and that's another one of the reasons I picked it.
Do you know oh, that's funny. Do you know, speaking of James Remar doing drugs, for people that don't know, one of the classic stories of Hollywood is that James Remar was the Michael Biehn role in Aliens.
I did not know that.
You could even find photographs of him in the costume on set, and was fired because he was too high on cocaine. And another thing you notice in these photos of James Remar on the Alien set is that he is bizarrely skinny. Like, he looks like a guy in the throes of a heavy cocaine addiction.
So you fired the guy who did cocaine, and then you hired the guy who just gets there naturally?
Yeah, then I guess I'm thinking Michael Biehn might have eventually become a big alcoholic.
Yeah, he always did look a little crazy eyes, didn't he?
Yeah, but now he looks like he's like made out of leather or something.
Yeah. Before the opening credits
Both good
happen,
actors.
Yeah, before the opening credits happen, actually before Iggy meets his family,
He meets his-
as well.
Oh.
There's a little moment that, in retrospect, becomes much more important, where one of the reporters basically says something like, "You should go to hell for what you did. Don't you think you should?" And he basically says, "I just want the power to get revenge on whoever did this," which is ultimately what will end up happening to poor Ig. As his life is falling apart. One of the things I don't like about the first 20 minutes of this film is that everything of consequence is really told about more than shown, as we're establishing the web of character relationships that
Yeah,
are
we
going to
find
get
out
us.
his family also thinks he's a murderer, which you were saying before I interrupted you.
Yes.
But they're still standing up for him. They're helping him out. His dad's helping pay for the defense, I guess, or has wanted to get him a really good lawyer. But this is when he goes outside to be by himself, and his brother comes out and plays the horn for him.
Yes.
And then his lawyer shows up, who is his childhood friend, played by Max Minghella.
Yep.
Who was Irving Thalberg in Babylon.
Yep, we're tying it back to Babylon
Yes,
again, once
and
again.
Max Minghella also not good in this movie.
No. Surprisingly so, I think, because he is a good actor.
Yeah, Daniel Radcliffe is pretty good, with some exceptions, one of which we'll get to pretty quickly.
I think so.
But he's decent. He's no John Cusack.
No, he's
He's
not.
no Christian Bale.
No, this is the period, like, I think this is the post-Potter period,
Sure,
if I remember
I would think
right,
so.
where Daniel Radcliffe is trying to do something else.
He is semi-nude a lot.
Yeah, he's trying to break out of that whole Harry Potter image. And if this film had taken off, I'm sure that would have helped, because there's not a lot of Harry Potter in Daniel Radcliffe
Yeah,
in this movie.
He did that play Equus, wherein he had to be naked all the time. Right?
Yes.
Doing some full frontal nudity on stage, and he's pretty in really good shape. He's like skinny ripped in this movie, and he's like
Yes.
constantly shirtless. But I guess his lawyer, Max Minghella, is the only person who believes that he's innocent.
He's a public defender, as
Yeah.
we find out. Iggy's father explicitly says, "We could hire you the best lawyer in Seattle." By By the way, this movie takes place in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll
and
come back
makes
to that
a
later.
lot of the location.
Yeah.
Like, that's one thing in this movie is that their house, the James Remar, Kathleen Quinlan home, is a quite beautiful home bordering on the woods. But when Max Minghella says he's the only person that believes him, did you start to suspect you might know who the killer was immediately?
I gotta be honest, the first time when I saw this movie, not right away, but there is something that tips off the killer kind of halfway through the movie that I don't even think the movie realizes is doing.
See, I immediately pretty much thought I knew who the killer was.
Were you right?
Yes. Though the movie eventually gives me one other suspect. Who was also in that same scene, playing
Yes.
a horn, perhaps. But then, anyway, so Daniel Radcliffe, to get away, this is where he goes to the bar.
Yes, and he has been suspended from his job as a radio DJ, which is just, and given the way he dresses, this is just the most hipster thing
Oh yeah, and his name's Iggy.
of all time, yeah. And again, we never see him spin records. We never see him.
We see him spin them at home.
Oh yes,
And he's
at
got
home.
quite an
That
extensive
is
record
true, right at the
collection.
beginning. But we never see him like on the air. We never see him express any real love for music or for his job or anything. But he's now just really sad because it's over.
No,
for the
in
moment.
fact, one thing I was going to complain about, but then the movie ties together actually, is that when you find out he's a radio DJ, I thought that Heroes, which has been played ad nauseum in ads and movies and things over the years, was a really weak choice for the kind of song a radio DJ would play. But we eventually find out that was he and Juno Temple's song
Yes.
from when they were younger, which it is the kind of song a fledgling music lover would happen upon and be like, yeah, this is a good song.
Yeah, that's the key, is fledgling.
Yeah.
Nothing about this
So
guy
it-
makes me think
so
he's
it
a
actually makes
real
sense.
DJ, though.
I didn't really have a problem with that. So he goes to this
Yeah.
bar, and the bar does not want to have his business anymore. And there are these two drunks next to him at the bar, and the bartender says that he's making the clientele uncomfortable, and he says, I make these guys uncomfortable. And this
Yep.
is when I had a problem with Daniel Radcliffe's performance, because that's a good line.
Yeah.
And the shooting of it is good. He doesn't sell the line as well as I just did.
No.
He does a terrible job with it.
You
And
are
I was
correct.
like, man, this was the first thing in the movie I thought was funny, and he blew it.
Yeah, pretty much the only person in town who's really sympathetic to him, other than Lee, we run into at this bar, Glenna. She's a bartender.
Do we know who plays her?
Yes, we do. Glenna is played by Kelly Garner,
Okay.
who's been in a couple of things that I have seen. She was in The Aviator, but of course that was very early on in her career.
Yeah, she was much younger.
I don't know. Actually, that may be the only thing that I've seen her in. She was in Godzilla King of the Monsters a couple of years ago. I actually like her performance.
Yeah, I did too.
I think it might be the best performance in the movie.
We'll get to one.
And that's not good.
There's one performance that is pretty good, and I was like, God bless this actor for showing up, like in a way James Remar did not.
Yeah.
And so we'll get to that soon.
Iggy's family doesn't believe him. People in the town want nothing to do with him. He has no job. And it is at this point, as a suspected murderer, that he does the absolute dumbest thing you can possibly do and shows up. Well, he doesn't show up. He hides near a vigil for his dead girlfriend, which is taking place both at the spot where she died, of course, and also at the treehouse
Kind of
where
a
they...
quasi Tom Sawyer situation.
Yeah, at the treehouse where they used to hang out and where they spent their childhood and their adolescence, and apparently a good portion of their young adulthood in a manner that might not entirely be healthy, to be perfectly honest with you. It's at this point that her dad, Aaron's dad, makes his...
And this is the
his
actor I was
first appearance.
referring to as David Morse, who plays the dad. And I was like, wow, David Morse is really trying his best in this movie, and I applaud him.
He gets nothing to work
He's
with.
not stealing their money, though. He emotes. He acts like his daughter really died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought he was he's the person I thought was the best in the movie.
He gets some of the worst dialogue in this movie, and there's a lot of bad dialogue in this movie. He gets some of the worst treatment. That he comes off as watchable is a testament to his skill.
Yeah, he's a good actor.
Anyway, so...
And you're like,
yeah.
David Morse, man, he's like the star of The Indian Runner, and there are a couple people in this movie that I kind of felt bad for having to do small roles in this movie, and I wondered how much they got paid, and he was one of them.
Yeah.
James Remar was not. I was like, this is the kind of role James Remar does now.
Yeah. No, it really
But
is.
Quinlan, a little bit I felt bad for.
I did.
And Morse I felt bad for, and we'll get to another one later.
Yeah,
There is
but-
one other high-profile actor in this movie.
There are
bizarrely.
lots of people to feel bad for in this movie. The vigil goes off just perfectly terribly. After it's over and everyone's gone, Iggy climbs down from the treehouse and starts destroying.
We also have the
memorial.
preacher at this vigil.
Yeah,
that
we
just
got-
like spends his time where he's supposed to be memorializing the dead girlfriend, demonizing Iggy.
Yeah, in just a terrible way. Like,
Yeah,
this is-
really vicious and misusing his time and kind of making you feel like this movie doesn't like religion very much or something.
Really, what would make you think that? So he was destroying, he smashes a statue of the Virgin Mary. He starts peeing all over the flowers and the candles, and I'm like, dude, not okay.
No.
But at this point, he gets basically...
As you would at your beloved's vigil.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, everyone's gone now, so it's, I guess it's fine. You know, do what you gotta do. And he gets rescued by Glenna.
Who is, for whatever reason, doubled back to the vigil scene.
Yes. She doubled back because plot convenience.
Yes.
They go home together, and they sleep together. And it is at this point that the weird things start to happen.
And this could almost just have been the end of the movie, them sleeping together and be like, okay, he got over it, he's got a defender. I guess it couldn't have been the end of the movie.
No, it would be a 20-minute short, and it would be one of the
wouldn't have
least
made much
watched
sense.
thing. It would be one of the least watched things ever. So the next morning at Glenna's place, Iggy wakes up, and he has a fledgling pair of horns that have started to sprout from his forehead, which, look a lot like goat horns, ram horns, dare I say devil horns. And he comes out into the living room, I think, very puzzled by this and not a little discombobulated. And it's here where the movie takes a really sharp left turn, and it doesn't bother explaining itself. Glenna does not seem at first glance to notice that anything's wrong. She only mentions the horns when she's prompted to. Then, out of nowhere, because he's clearly distressed about these two things that are growing on his forehead that shouldn't be growing there, she starts asking if she should eat a donut. There is a box of donuts in front of her. She starts to wonder if maybe she shouldn't eat all of the donuts in the box.
Which there are 6.
There are 6. She makes a point of it. She even counts them out. Because she has this real desire, you see, like this deep-held desire to just let herself go and be fat. Because no one likes her, she's not with anybody, she doesn't consider herself desirable, so she might as well just completely let herself
She
go.
feels worthless. Apparently, this is, I think, where the first time we found out that she says everybody thinks she's just a slut.
Yes. And as we find out later in the movie,
That is what people think.
that's not, and it's also not without some foundation. But it's like, why is this girl going on about eating donuts? This is a complete non sequitur. Why is she asking Iggy's permission to eat the? Do you think I should? Do you think I should eat a donut? Do you
And
think
why
I should
does
eat
she-
all the donuts?
Yes, and why does she not think more of these horns, though she can clearly see them?
Yes, that is exactly right.
It's almost like they do it in such passing that you almost think that she's joking about seeing the horns in a weird way. That to her they're metaphorical, and it's going to be a thing where he thinks people see the horns, but they don't. You find out in the next scene. But no, it turns out that we're going to find out that people just don't care about the horns that much.
No, they really don't.
But they can see them.
But they can see them, and they basically think they're relatively normal, I guess. It's just that nobody else has them. He does what at this point is probably the smart thing and goes to a doctor's office, where he runs into a girl who's being a brat and a mother who's kind of putting up with her daughter.
This is where
This
I
is-
where I wanted to turn off the movie.
I knew it was. And a receptionist who is really kind of trying to put up with the whole situation, basically. And then the mom turns to Iggy and starts saying some really terrible things about that she knows her daughter's a brat and she'd really just like to go off and leave her. Or worse. And then she starts talking about her golf pro. All of this is completely without prompting, by the way. And she says something very racist about her golf pro. And then she says they've had an affair and she'd love to restart it. And the receptionist, the mom is like, should I just go off and leave my daughter? Should I start the affair? And Iggy's like, what is going on here? He goes up to the receptionist, basically is like, can you do something? And the receptionist says, I hate people like this. Should I just tell her off? And Iggy says, yeah, do it. The receptionist stands up and starts telling off the mom to the point where she gets upset and leaves, at which point the daughter says that she really wishes her mom would just die.
And to be fair, when you describe it like that, it's meant to be both shocking and funny. They go in depth with this. The scene goes on a while.
Yeah. Way too long.
And it is not funny.
No.
It could have been, maybe.
There are individual moments where you're like, conceptually, I see how this is funny.
Yeah, but it doesn't work. It does not work to the point that I wanted to turn the movie off. Yeah, and this is bad.
And I am 100, I totally understand. Just to cut to the chase.
I wasn't offended, I just found it so unfunny and gross.
I found it unfunny and gross, and I was a little offended.
Maybe
so I'm
I
right
was
there.
a little offended
I'm right there with you. I do get it. So anyway, just to cut to the chase, because you will eventually find all this stuff out if you watch the movie. These horns that Iggy is growing, and they do grow throughout the movie, basically grant him supernatural powers. And they also compel certain behaviors from people around him. Everyone who is near him suddenly has this desire to confess their darkest secrets, their worst impulses.
And ask permission of him to commit them.
Yes, and ask permission of him to commit them. And if he gives permission, or if he tells somebody to do something, they are supernaturally compelled to do it.
And people are still not taken aback by the horns to the point that they kind of forget he has them unless he brings it back up, which comes up with the doctor, the bad doctor.
Yeah, it comes up with almost everybody, actually. Yeah, and there's following this deeply uncomfortable scene is a scene in the doctor's office that actually does manage to straddle the line a little better.
Yeah.
Between shocking and funny.
But you're just so put off by the previous scene that.
And there's a lot in this scene to put you off too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's a better scene. It would have been better if you hadn't seen the scene before.
It really would. Anyway, Ig has gone to the doctor to get the horns removed if he can. He goes under anesthesia, and then we have an extended flashback. Clearly, they're somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. They're in this old logging town. We get to see Ig as a kid hanging out with his brother, Terry, and hanging out with his best friend, Lee, and hanging out with a kid that they all call Meathead. Meatbag, yes, I'm sorry.
And the young bartender girl.
Yes, and Glenna as a young girl. But this is also where we see Ig meet Marin for the first time. Literally by her using the cross, the gold cross that she wears around her neck, to shine a light into his eyes using Morse code.
Which his dad points out is Morse code.
Yes, and this is the most contrived thing of all time.
Oh, yes. The kid is a good match for Daniel Radcliffe.
He is. Actually, all of the younger actors do a pretty good job. Most of them, I would say, better than their adult counterparts.
Ooh, I think we get some painfully bad child acting in some of the in the Big Dare scene.
I did say most, but I know what you mean. I actually have to especially single out young Marin, the actress who plays Juno Temple's character, who actually has gone on to become she's the only one of the kids, I think, who's had a career that's amounted to anything. It's Sabrina Carpenter. The thing she's probably the most known for, unfortunately for her, is being the best friend sidekick character on the Disney Channel Boy Meets World sequel series. Whoa. And she's also had a little bit of a career in music. So, but she's actually doing something in the entertainment industry. So there is that. We see these kids. We see Ig meet Marin. We see a ridiculous dare scene. Basically, these kids are doing what I'm sure a lot of kids do in these small towns. Somebody's gotten a box of cherry bombs, right? And they're going out and blowing things up just to see what they look like when they blow them up. And finally we get down to one cherry bomb left, and Ig wants it. So he agrees to a dare. He will get on a shopping cart and slide down the old log flume into the lake, where he hits his head on the log and goes under the water and almost dies.
Well, this sequence and scene is very crazy because the setting is gorgeous.
Oh, it is.
The background is beautiful. It's colorful. It's the shooting and editing of this suggests that the children actors cost a lot less than James Remar and David Morse. It seems like they had a lot of time with these kids and could set this scene up and had time to light everything and stage everything exactly as they like. But Meathead demands that young Daniel Radcliffe do it naked.
Yeah.
And so when he's up on the shopping cart, he's in his tidy whities and stuff. And thank God the movie didn't give us child nudity. But it came close enough. But it does beg the question when you watch it, you're like, he's not naked. And then later on when he actually does the thing and wants the cherry bomb, the kid says, like, you weren't naked. It's
yeah,
like,
so I'm not giving you the cherry bomb.
Out earlier.
You didn't. It's like, dude, come on, man. He came close enough.
Yeah. It was like, didn't it beg the question when he was up there? Hey, he's not naked.
Yeah, you really should have said that earlier. You lose your right to complain when he almost kills himself with the cherry bomb, I think. He hits his head on the logs. He gets trapped under the logs.
When he's up there about to go down the shopping cart is when we get some of our really bad child acting and some bad child dialogue where they're like, come on, dude, one cherry bomb. Come on. Yeah. Like, it's painful.
Yeah, this was not written into the script. They told these kids to ad-lib. You just know they did.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're not skilled enough.
No.
But that's
in fact, the little kid version of Glenna is probably the best in that scene.
She really is. Both of the Glennas don't get enough credit.
Yeah, they were both good in the movie.
They really were. Anyway, so Ig is about to die because he's gone down the log flume into the lake or into the river or whatever, and then he hit his head on the logs, and then the logs came in and closed over him, and he can't find his way out. So finally, his best friend Lee has to dive in and save him, and don't worry, that kindness will be repaid in just a minute. So Ig gets the cherry bomb, and he also has Marin's cross, which she apparently left for him at the church when they met the first time.
At some point.
Yeah, she dropped.
Broken in some way.
Yeah, she dropped it. It's broken, but she says later on she dropped it deliberately to
make. We don't know that yet.
Yeah, we don't know that yet.
What we know is that the kid version of Iggy, he wants to get with Marin, and so he enlists his more handy friend Lee, young Minghella, to fix this cross necklace for Marin.
Yes.
And this becomes a thing wherein they make a trade, and we find out that Lee also has designs on Marin and thinks he should give her the cross and tell her he fixed it. And young Iggy says, please don't, I'll give you the cherry bomb, I really want Marin.
Yes.
And so my suspicions were even more heightened at this point about the eventual thing that
it's not much of a murder mystery.
No. No.
This ultimately actually leads to Lee's mangling when the cherry bomb goes off on his hand.
That was one thing when we saw Max Minghella earlier, I didn't notice that he was mangled.
Yes.
Did they make a point of that?
They did not early on, but you do see it if you look, especially other places in the movie. You do see like the scarring on his hands. He does get his fingers reattached.
Okay,
but
I did not notice.
He gets two of his fingers blown off with the cherry bomb explosion. So
for which Iggy blames himself.
Yes, but he's also got the love of Marin now. So
Marin reveals when he's blaming himself that, look, not only is it not your fault he blew up his hand with the cherry bomb, which, duh, what an idiot.
Yeah.
B, I always wanted you to be the one who found it. I didn't get with you because you fixed it, and I didn't know it was Lee. I got with you because I always wanted to get with you. Is kind of where the movie actually started to pick up a little bit, because that's how you think love works, that just if you'd been the one, if I'd known he fixed it, I'd be with him now. That's not bad.
Yeah, no, it really isn't.
And you're right, the child version of her is good at delivering those lines.
She really is. Sabrina Carpenter doesn't get enough credit as an actress, and I think part of that's the Disney Channel crap. She was also in like a really crappy remake of Adventures in Babysitting, which never looked that up. Just telling you that right now. So yeah, you're right. The movie has started to pick up a little bit. We've got this young drama. We've got this young love. We've got this education on the nature of feelings and relationships, which is when Iggy comes back out from under the anesthetic to find that not only has the doctor not cut off his horns, but the doctor is, boning his assistant.
Yeah.
Which, this is what horns does to you. It gives you a few flashes of quality, and then it takes it away in the worst way possible.
Yeah, so I guess we didn't have where they age into who they are now in that flashback, or do we?
Do we? I don't remember. We might.
They have a kiss in the treehouse.
Yeah.
Which becomes them having
It
sex
is-
in the
it
treehouse.
is-
Which I also wanted to shout out that having sex in the treehouse is one of my favorite parts of the film, because the nude Juno Temple, unless it's a body double, either way, I enjoyed it, I have to say.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't.
Give that a thumbs up. That was
Yeah.
one of my favorite, if not my favorite part of Horns, one of my favorites. I was like, oh yeah, this is getting a little better.
Yeah.
Pale Blue Eye could have used some sleazy nudity, gratuitous nudity.
It could have. And now we get to the part of the film where things are really going badly for Iggy. Even worse than they already were, because he goes home. He goes to talk to his parents. And in two of the most uncomfortable scenes in the movie, he finds out, because of the power of the horns, what his family really thinks about it.
But first,
Yeah.
he talks to Lee.
Yes.
And Lee does not see the horns.
That's true. And this, the first time I watched the movie, is where I start to... It's not just that he doesn't see the horns, and they're much bigger now and much more obvious. He flat out denies that Ig has them.
And so the way Ig takes it is that only bad people see the horns and are
Lee-
compelled. And Lee is so good.
Yes, and Lee is a good guy. And
I took it exactly the opposite way.
And the thing is, it actually does, when you trace through it, turn out to be a little closer to that first one than you might suspect. But it's not because Lee is so good. But we'll come back to that. I think we have to come back to that.
So then, of course, after this, he goes and talks to his mom.
Yeah.
You expect to follow up like Lee and be a good person, but we know immediately when she sees the horns that she's going to reveal something. And what she reveals is that she just wants Iggy to go away, never come back home, stop being their son.
Yep.
Like, she wants to go back to a life where she can be happy. This wasn't bad. And then
No.
when he goes to
It's
see
a
his...
deeply painful scene.
It is painful and awkward, but it was meant to be, and it was in the way they intended it, not in some... it wasn't trying to be funny and
Yes.
failing. And then he goes and sees his dad.
Yes.
And his dad, one thing we've glossed over is that some evidence was destroyed, and that's like...
The evidence that might have proved his innocence.
Or his guilt.
Or his guilt.
He believes his innocence because he says he didn't do it.
Yes, but his dad, obviously thinking, he flat out says, which he kind of implied it in the earlier scene, but didn't outright come out and say, I think you're guilty. Here, because of the power of the horns, he just says, I know you're guilty. I always loved Marin, like a daughter to me, basically. Why did you take that away from me? I kind of hate you for that. Oh, but you're still my son, and I still love you, so I paid somebody to burn down that
Arson
office
that-
and
that
destroy the
lab.
evidence.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh no. The one thing that might have actually helped Ig, and it's not going to help.
Then he asks Max Minghella if he knew the dad did it, and he's like, if I did know it, I would have to go to the police. So.
Yeah, basically, in other words, don't tell me that.
Yeah, so right now we're in kind of a decent stretch of the movie in a weird way.
Yes, but now we get to the point where things take a full-on turn for, like, the cheesy and crazy. Because now Daniel Radcliffe's about to go back to that bar, and he starts trying to use the power of the horns for himself. Throughout the film, to this point, he's been followed by all of these journalists, literally all over town, wherever he could go. And he gets to the bar and starts to go in, and these journalists are following him. And one of them, like the lead journalist, I don't remember the actress's name, but she sidles up to him and basically says, can't you just confess on camera that you did it? Because again, the horns are working on her. Can't you just confess on camera that you did it? It would really help my career. And he uses the journalists to get the journalists out of his way by saying, hey, you guys just go ahead and start beating each other up, and whoever wins gets an exclusive interview.
So then it turns into the movie Anchorman. and the movie Anchorman 2.
Yeah.
With a full-on huge battle of the journalists. And then he goes in the bar, and this is actually where I thought, too, the movie was decent in that he decides to put the horns to work for him in trying to solve the murder. And I was like, yeah, this is actually kind of a good idea.
Yeah, it's a detective story after all, and
Yeah.
he's got supernatural powers.
Yeah, he's
so,
going to use people's inability to keep their secrets from him and their evil thoughts to find out who killed his girlfriend. I was like, that's
Exactly.
kind of smart.
Exactly. And does he find out anything useful?
He finds out there was a witness against him that's about to flip on him. The person's telling the cops that they saw him do it. That's
Yes.
a waitress.
Yeah, he already knew there was a secret witness, and now he finds out the identity of that secret witness. At which point, the bartender has said he just hates being a bartender, and he wants to burn the bar down
Didn't get the insurance money.
to get the insurance money. So it just tells him to do that, and then leaves.
So here's my question. The bartender sets the bar on fire and burns it down. How is he going to get the insurance money by burning the bar down in broad daylight in front of witnesses everywhere?
Yeah, because there are half a dozen people in the bar. This is while he's in the bar.
And the journalists are fighting outside.
Wait. Maybe there's a really deep message here. Maybe this is about the seductive nature of evil, that even when it's a terrible idea to do something wrong, even when we know that we won't get away with it, there's something deep inside of us in our twisted, sin-sick souls that just can't help itself. Or maybe the movie's really just not all that good.
Yeah. I don't think it thought this through.
I go with option B.
Yeah.
Then we get to, and this is the other name star that you
As who I felt pretty bad for. And it's pretty decent in this role.
She is, and I think there's a very specific reason why, though, because she's played this role before. It goes to a diner, which, just so I want to set the scene for people who haven't seen this movie. This is a retro diner. It's a 50s style, like classic American diner. To see the waitress, to learn about why she would lie about him, basically. And he finds the waitress, and it's Heather frickin' Graham.
Who is looking great.
Yeah, she's looking great.
aging beautifully in this, which I guess is 10 years old now, but she doesn't look a day over roller girl age almost, right?
No.
Which is also this with her and James Remar is kind of a sad repairing of People from Drugstore Cowboy, a movie I love.
Well, the really sad thing here is, and oh gosh, I hope this is not in the book. I hope this is something that somebody just came up with for the movie, because of course, this whole thing is set in a Pacific Northwest town. It's a logging town. There's got to be a sawmill somewhere around there, and Heather Graham is a waitress wearing a retro style like diner uniform working in a diner. This is Twin Peaks.
And Drugstore Cowboy took place in Portland, I think.
Oh yeah. Okay. And I know that they have the Twin Peaks reference down specifically because Heather Graham's only got a few scenes in this movie, but at one point when Ig comes in to confront her, she is talking to a table of bikers about whether they would like dessert because they've got a great cherry pie. And this is...
I took that more as just a sexual thing, but you're right. That's
There
a
is
total Twin Peaks thing too.
it's doing double duty. It's pulling double work, but it is at this point that I just wanted to punch the movie.
yeah, it was pretty bad.
How dare you, Sully? How dare you, Sully Twin Peaks? The middle of season 2 does that well enough anyway. How dare you? Ig confronts the waitress and asks her, why would you do this terrible thing? Why would you lie about me? And Heather Graham, God bless her, she has the worst set of excuses that she has to deliver, and she gives it everything she's got.
Yeah, she David Morses this one scene she has.
Yep, she wants to be famous. That's it. She wants to write a book. She wants to make a sex tape. She wants to go on TV.
She wants plastic surgery.
She wants plastic surgery to take care of, some issues. It's just like, oh, Heather, not for this movie.
Yeah, this made you sad.
It did. It really, really did.
She's just made up her testimony against him.
Yes.
Which starts to rule out that the twist will be that he really did kill her.
Yes. But this is also, he leaves the diner, but sticks around and dispatches Heather Graham in a fairly ridiculous scene where we find out that in addition to his horns truth compelling and like obeying powers, he can also summon snakes.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Lots
about
and lots of snakes, which invade Heather Graham's car and bite her to death.
Yeah, which we also find out how much this movie knows about religion at that earlier vigil when the priest is complaining about stuff. When he says that when Satan was cast out of heaven, he was made to crawl as a snake, which is not how it went.
No, it's not. I can't believe we forgot the priest because he shows up in
I
one
thought you
other
would bring
scene.
this up, yeah.
I thought I completely glossed over it in the middle of Ig's Dark Night of the Soul, which actually comes like
Yeah, after he goes to the doctor's office and
30 to
before
40
he decides
minutes.
to put it to his use, the
Yeah.
horns, he goes to church to
Yes.
try to see if like the priest can do something to cast off this spell.
Can you do some of your priest voodoo is effectively his idea. Can you say a prayer or sprinkle some holy water or pull a rabbit out of a hat? He doesn't say that, but that's the general idea. And make these
It's not the worst idea.
and make the horns go. No, but I'm saying the rabbit out of the hat.
Oh, I
He
know.
doesn't say that. And make these horns go away. And the priest basically says, no, there's nothing I can do for you. Also, why don't you just do the decent thing and kill yourself? This
Yeah, he
movie.
says he wants to string him up.
Yep.
And then he's like, but wait, you could just do it yourself.
Yep.
Have some class, buddy.
Have some class. Ig continues to use his powers. We don't really need to go over all the scenes. We find out that his friend Eric, the fat kid from
Is now a
childhood,
cop.
who is now a cop, busy harassing him effectively, and he really wants to just nail Ig to the wall and arrest him. We also find out that Eric is closeted and that he's with it. His partner is also closeted. That leads to Daniel Radcliffe helping them to get together later on in the movie. You really don't need to follow this like point by point or cover everything point
But
by
what we
point.
do need to get
because it's
to-
not good.
I guess the important thing that happens next is another flashback.
Yes.
Where we find out James Remar, when he talked to him through the horns magic, says one thing of note, which is, you were losing her and couldn't handle it, and that's why you killed her, to
Yeah.
Daniel Radcliffe. That kind of puts in our head that maybe Daniel Radcliffe did do something, or there's something more to this we didn't know. And sure enough, we get a flashback to the diner on the last night of Juno Temple's life.
And the last night of their relationship, because he's gone to the diner to propose to her, and she's gone to the diner to break up with him. Which, in a better movie, could have been a better scene.
And she's going to break up with him to go to California. She questions, this brings up another thing. She's like, I want to expand my horizons. Have you ever even been with another girl or slept with another girl? He says no, which is the truth, because we find out earlier that the waitress, when she was a kid, was giving hand jobs to him and his brother, but not actually sleeping with them, apparently. That's his only sexual experience other than with Juno Temple.
Yeah, that's our Ig Parrish. He is a classy dude.
Yes, and so he's like, no, you were the only ones that have been together. And she's like, yeah, and then he starts to suspect there's another man.
Isn't that the problem, Ig?
Yeah, isn't that the problem? She wants to go explore life in California, and it turns out he asks her if there's another man, and she kind of says yes.
Yeah.
And then he asks if they slept together, and she doesn't answer, and he takes that as an affirmative.
Yep.
And then we also find out that after they had this fight in the bar in which he was made to look very ridiculous loudly because he starts yelling at her, and it turns the heads of everyone in the diner. It's not bar, the diner.
It
So we
actually,
can kind
before you go on, actually it is kind of both. Did you notice in the scene when they sat down across from each other, the waitress brings him over a shot
Oh, yeah.
that he hasn't even ordered at a diner? Where is this diner?
Some
that will
diners-
just like hand out shots
I
of
don't know
liquor
about that.
without.
Maybe
and,
it's as usual.
and do they take reservations?
Yeah, maybe it's as usual. There
That's-
are
that's
diners with
possible.
booze.
That's true. That's true. I'm carping on something that's unimportant.
Maybe she ordered it for him before he got there. I
That's
don't remember.
to soften the blow, maybe. And I'm carping on this basically to avoid getting to the rest of the movie, which is where things take a downturn and never recover.
No. This is the point at which he looks the most guilty because she did break up with him. He did not take it well. And there were many witnesses to him not taking it well, which makes it even more humiliating to him. And then it turns out, we find out that his brother gave her a ride home.
Or he started to. He started to give her a ride home. She basically told him to pull over, and she ran off into the woods.
Because maybe he was hitting on her?
He was hitting on her, and it was deeply
which is
uncomfortable.
it's
She
pretty
ran off into the
uncomfortable.
woods to the treehouse that we have seen a lot by this point. He starts to go after her, but he's not feeling great. And so he goes back to the car. He passes out and wakes up the next morning, and there's blood all over his clothes, and there is a bloody rock on the passenger seat. Suspecting the worst, he goes looking for Marin, and he's the one to find her. And now Ig is starting to suspect his own brother, because Terry had said he'd not seen Marin that night, and that clearly turns out to be a lie. So he takes revenge on his brother in one of the worst possible... this is, in a way, this is uglier to me than the scene we talked about earlier in the waiting room at the doctor's office. That is the most, in-your-face, uncomfortable scene. This scene, though...
Yeah, because his brother has a James Remar-sized drug problem.
Yes. And Ig knows that. And so basically he tells his brother to take all of his drugs.
And his brother, because the horns,
has no choice.
Just starts doing all these drugs.
Yep. Ig even drops something on here that, again, in a better movie would have been used better, saying basically, and while you're tripping, you're going to see everything she saw, and you're going to feel everything she felt.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about this. And maybe blocked it out.
And you're going to stay alert and alive for all of it. Even if he had done it, which, spoiler alert, it turns out Terry is not in fact the murderer. We may have met the murderer by this point. This is psychological torture. It's psychological torture of his brother. Taking advantage of his and of the audience. It's taking advantage of his brother's addiction too, which is just, because Ig, I think, kind of also is experiencing these flashbacks and seeing a little bit of what Terry is seeing. In a better movie, this could have been the spot for the reveal. This could have been the spot where we finally learn who the killer really is and that it's not Terry. But this is Horns, so we don't get that. And the killer remains, at the moment, undiscovered.
But do we find out here kind of what happened to Marin?
Vaguely.
Okay.
Vaguely. I mean, we do find out that she got smashed in the head with a rock, which we already kind of knew.
We already knew this. Okay.
Yeah. At this point, this is where Marin's gold cross really comes back into the movie. Marin's cross is missing, at least if I remember this correctly. And it turns out that it's being worn by Lee. And although the movie never explicitly comes out and says it, I think the implication is pretty clear that the reason Lee couldn't see Ig's horns, and the reason the horn magic never affected him at all, is because of Marin's pure angelic influence acting through the cross and protecting him and preventing him from seeing any of the bad things or succumbing to any of the bad things that Ig might do. But Ig meets Lee at the docks where he had taken that fateful slide onto, and where Lee had saved his life all those years ago. He pulls the cross off Lee's neck. All of a sudden, Lee starts freaking out because he sees the horns, and then he confesses to Marin's murder.
In building my case of who I thought that the murderer was from the start, I thought he was just lying about not seeing the horns. But you're right.
No, and that's
here
what
it's revealed.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that's what I thought too, and that was what got me to suspect Lee in the first place. That everyone sees the horns but him, and Ig takes it as a sign of great goodness on Lee's part that he really believes in Ig's innocence. But it turns out, and you and I both thought he was just lying straight out.
I thought he was lying.
But no, as it turns out, Marin was a pure soul. She was the light bringer.
Yeah, I
she
thought it might turn out
Earth.
that Lee himself was supernatural and the devil. But that's not what happens.
No, and that would have been a more interesting...
I don't know if it would have been. It would have been kind of the same.
I think it would have been. But anyway, so Lee has already kind of alluded to there maybe having been something between Marin and him in the past that Ig didn't know about. And this is where we get that flashback from Lee's perspective. He was also kind of at the diner that evening. He followed Terry when Terry was taking Marin
Yeah, and at
home.
this point, we very much believe that Lee was the other man she was talking about at the diner.
Yes, that's
And
what
that-
we're meant to believe.
Yeah, and that they've been having a relationship behind Daniel Radcliffe's back.
Exactly. That is clearly what we're meant to believe. And Lee goes into the woods in the rain, chasing after Marin, and confesses his love for her, only to find out that she doesn't care about him, and that all of the... She's like, you know, when you and Ig and I are together, it's all so terribly uncomfortable because, you know, I have feelings for you and you have feelings for me, and there's that elephant in the room, and she's like, I don't have feelings for you.
Yeah.
And enraged, and maybe this is the ugliest scene in the movie.
Yes, it's not just what happens to Marin. So what happens is that Lee rapes Marin.
Yes.
And then murders her.
Yes, and
But then he tells Daniel Radcliffe about it when they're fighting on the dock and uses a lot of explicit dialogue. And
Yes.
that's uncomfortable.
and that is the point where the movie really like it's already been it's a dumb movie, but this is the point where it goes over the edge and never
Yeah.
and can never
Oh,
come
yeah.
back, because it's just not a good enough movie to have earned
Dialogue like that.
and the ugliness of that
No.
scene. What we think we see then is the comeuppance. Lee traps Ig in his car, which is a vintage car, because hipster, sets it on fire. Ig basically, we're thinking like it burns to, he's going to burn to death. Ig panics, turns on the car. I don't even know how the car is running, frankly, because it's a piece of junk. Floors it and drives off the docks into the water. And Lee thinks, okay, well, there's no way Ig could have survived that. And he goes back to town and starts telling everybody, you know, I was his lawyer and he confessed the crime to me. He said I did kill him, and then he killed himself. And that doesn't end up happening. What ends up happening?
At some point, Ig wakes up from a coma, and at some point, I don't know, he hasn't maybe gone to see David Morse yet?
No, I don't think he has.
Okay, so at some point, he wakes up and is alive, and it's like, no, that's not what happened at all. But he hasn't busted Lee in a meaningful way, but his brother now decides he won't be a coward anymore and will help him, even though he did an incredibly cruel thing to him earlier. He goes to David Morse's house for some reason.
Yeah, but before he does, this is the important thing. He puts on Marin's cross.
Oh.
And what happens to Daniel Radcliffe at that point?
Well, he's got crazy huge horns now.
Not after the cross he does.
No, see, I think he's already seen David Morse when he puts on the cross. I think the way he gets the cross is that David Morse had it.
Ah, okay.
See, he goes to David Morse's house, and this is the best. David Morse has a box that was like being hidden by Marin for Iggy.
Oh, yeah.
And Iggy opens it up, and there's a note to him written in Morse
No,
code.
no. What's in the box is not a note. It's worse than that. That would have been better. What's in the box is a key.
Oh, yeah. So the key opens up something at the treehouse.
Yes, it opens up a padlock that opens up a secret compartment. It opens up Chekhov's compartment, which has been revealed to us in the first flashback, that's in the floor of the treehouse where Iggy can hide like blankets and stuff. If you are the father of a girl who was brutally murdered
Yes, this is
after
great.
being violated, and you have possessions that she left for her ex-boyfriend who you think is the killer, you're holding that back. Why would you not give that to the police?
Yeah, there's not a lot of smart stuff here. So he opens this up, and there's a note to him in Morse code.
Oh, wait, did we have Morse code introduced earlier in the
Yes,
movie?
which is
Oh, it's all tying back together.
which is one of the most unnecessary tie-together plant payoffs in the history of plants and payoffs. Just the idea that there needed to ever be Morse code or the note couldn't just be written in plain English is insane. What it reveals is, what if you've seen the movie Phenomenon and remember the first scene of the movie, you've been waiting for this shoe to drop the entire film, is that when we saw the first scene of the movie, when she says, I'll love you for the rest of mine, you're like, oh, she's going to die and knows she's going to die. And here's another plant payoff. David Morse's wife, her mom, died of cancer at some point, which is what Daniel Radcliffe asks him about. Like, he's like, your wife died of cancer, right? So here we have this note that, of course, reveals Marin has terminal cancer that is genetic.
Yes,
And
it is hereditary cancer.
And that she's kind of knows Radcliffe is going to want to marry her because she wants to marry him. They have all these plans and life plans, and she knows that if she reveals to him that she has this cancer, rather than it sending him away to be happy, he's going to just want to be with her even more because their love is true.
And take care of her for the rest of her life.
Yes.
Yeah. So she won't let him do that. She's going to break up with him and hurt him and chase him away and then leave
And die.
And die somewhere else where he won't be burdened by her. And if you think that Nicholas Sparks guest wrote this scene, at this point I would not blame you.
Yeah, and so then he's, after her natural death, be given this key and find this note that will explain that she really did just only love him. There was no other man. She wanted to do all the things and not break up with him. And then she wants him to go on and fall in love and have a great life and all this stuff. And did you kind of wish that the movie would have ended with him getting together with Glenna the waitress and kind of redeeming her and then falling in love?
You know, there are so many more satisfying ways this movie could have ended, and that is in fact one of them.
Yeah, so somehow, like, maybe the cross is in there. Somehow he gets a hold of the cross and confronts Lee's.
No, he's already got the cross. He's got the
Okay.
cross when he goes to the treehouse.
Okay, so at some point he puts it on, and putting it on transforms him from devil to angel, literally.
Well, no, not quite. It transforms him from devil to Daniel Radcliffe. But if you were like a Harry Potter fan, I can understand the confusion. He just goes back to looking like his normal 26-year-old.
He grows angel wings.
No, that's when he takes it off. This is where we get to the climax of the movie. All of this has been happening up in the treehouse, and with the cross on, Ig finds Lee, who apparently, because of the magic of the cross and Marin's pure angelic light-bringer-ish influence from beyond the grave, does not remember the fight they had. He does not remember that he tried to kill Ig. He does not remember that he went into
this was
town and
bizarre.
lied about Ig. And you're like, at this point, the movie is whatever. You're just waiting for it to reach some sort of
Yeah, you
terminus
just want it to be
point.
over.
Right. So
There are no more shoes to drop.
right, Eric Meatbag Meathead, whatever he was, the grown-up cop, the now very happily committed to a same-sex relationship, I suppose, cop shows up with Terry, his brother, to confront Lee, and Lee says, yeah, I did it, and then in a burst of nuts, takes, I think it's a rifle, blows Eric's head off.
Yeah, I kind of liked him blowing Meatbag's head off.
It was okay, but the special effects were terrible. Oh, before he does this, he actually shoots Terry in the leg. It's Terry,
yes.
Terry in the leg first, and then Eric becomes the headless cop.
Yeah.
And at this point, Daniel Radcliffe is getting beat up. All of his allies are down, and there's nothing he can do. So he apologizes to Marin, and he rips off the cross. And this is when he briefly gets the angel wings.
Yes.
And then they burn off of him, and he turns into a full-fledged, like, fire and brimstone devil. And you're thinking to yourself, all right, now at least we're gonna get some supernatural stuff. Daniel Radcliffe has no supernatural fighting powers, and he is the weakest Beelzebub in the history of devils on film, despite the fact that he is now a fully fledged satanic creature with like rocky flesh and lava beneath the plates or something. Lee still almost beats him to within an inch of his life. How does this happen?
I don't know.
Shoots him several times, impales him with his own pitchfork. Oh, we forgot about
Oh, yeah, there was a
pitchfork.
pitchfork.
There's been a pitchfork through the whole movie. Because Ig is... I don't know if you've gotten, like, the subtle subtext of this movie, but Ig is kind of a devil figure. And at some point he picks up a pitchfork out of a barn or something. I don't even know.
Yeah, I can't remember when exactly the pitchfork starts becoming part of the
This
movie.
is so deeply stupid. Anyway, Ig finally wins. He does does kill Lee, and then he dies. Is that the end of the movie?
No.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. In fact, somehow Ig dies.
Yes, because he's been wounded too deeply. This devil has been wounded too deeply in his final fight with Lee. He got shot several times and then impaled through like the chest with the pitchfork. But Lee is dead. Ig dies.
And then Ig goes to his version of heaven.
And what is his version of heaven?
Do you remember the movie Contact?
I vaguely do remember.
Do you remember when Jodie Foster goes and meets the aliens? And you get to see, like, it's almost like her version of heaven?
I do remember this scene.
It was getting to hang out with her dead father, who was...
Oh no, I'd forgotten this part.
It was David Morse.
Oh no, I'd forgotten this part.
Yeah, and so his version of heaven is hanging out forever and eternity in that field with David Morse's daughter, Juno Temple.
Yeah,
And repeating the line from Phenomenon.
Underneath the treehouse. Yeah. You know, hanging out on a blanket, making out with Juno Temple. I can think of worse ways to spend eternity.
Very true.
One way I would not want to spend eternity is by watching Horns. Are we agreed on this?
Full Horns was not good. It's more crazy than Pale Blue Eye. I don't know if it's better than Pale Blue Eye. It's a tough call.
It's not. Well, yes, it is. It's not a better made movie. So now that we've talked about Horns, I talked about the movies I was going to pick earlier. What ultimately drove me to Horns was that I thought Pale Blue Eye was a competently made but very dull movie. It's like the worst kind of good you can have because it's so bland. I thought, you know what I need is a bad film that's consistently entertaining and aesthetically is completely the opposite, where you've got bright colors and beautiful scenery and interesting camera choices and weird special effects and, you know, all sorts of things. And the fact that Harry Potter is the main figure of this film when his stepbrother was one of the main figures of Pale Blue Eye was, I now have to reveal, the tipping point that made me have to pick Horns. And like I said earlier, we've got a whole British as American theme going on in this episode. And the lead four actors in this movie, the top four billed actors, are all British. Daniel Radcliffe, Juno Temple.
I didn't know she was British.
She is. Dude, have you never seen Ted Lasso?
No.
Matt. Okay, so a brief segue into Juno Temple in Ted Lasso. You know what Ted Lasso is.
It's a sitcom with that guy.
With that guy. That guy's name is Jason Sudeikis.
Yeah.
Formerly, what was he, Mr. Olivia Wilde?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Like the Don't Worry Darling thing. I don't know if they were married or they did have a kid together. Anyway, it was like some custody thing that came out during the Don't Worry Darling press tour. Not the best time, I guess. But then again, that wasn't the best movie, so we're going to let it slide. Anyway, Jason Sudeikis plays an American football coach who gets hired to manage a Premier League football team in England. Only as it turns out, in England, when they say football, what they mean is soccer. That's the thumbnail description. That's the hook that the whole series hangs on. It's a really crazy premise that absolutely would never happen in the real world, but the TV series actually does a lot of work to make you buy into it. Like, why would the owner of a Premier League soccer team hire an American football coach? They actually devote a lot of time to answering that question. And the Premier League is played by Hannah Waddingham, whom I knew as like the severe Septa from Game of Thrones, the one who's shaming Cersei Lannister.
Okay.
Yeah, and she's great. I mean, Jason Sudeikis is great. Hannah Waddingham is great. Everybody in this show is like a top-notch performance, both in comedic terms and in dramatic terms. When the show starts, Ted Lasso finds himself having to deal with a team that's got a lot of... They're not a very successful team, but they've got a lot of big personalities, and none of them is bigger than this, like, sassy, full of himself figure by the name of Jamie Tart, who is dating an older, like he's 23, 24, and he's dating a fashion model who's either 30 or in her early 30s. She's definitely older than he is, played by Juno Temple.
Ah.
And Juno Temple is the biggest ray of sunshine in the show. She's generally positive and upbeat. She tries to see the best in everybody, even if they don't necessarily deserve it. She really tries to relate to people on a friendly and personal level, and that is actually, I'd completely forgotten she was in Horns, and I thought when I was watching Ted Lasso, I'm getting introduced to Juno Temple. This is amazing. How have I never seen her before? And then I pull this up for this episode,
You're
and I'm
like, oh,
like,
I've seen a lot of her.
I really have. So yeah, Daniel Radcliffe, Juno Temple, Max Minghella, as you mentioned earlier, and Terry, the brother, who's Joe Anderson. So the top 4 billed actors here are all Brits slumming as Americans, putting on, in some cases, convincing American accents. Who do you think does the best job?
Juno Temple.
Yep, that's the right answer. Who do you think does the worst job?
Oh, just in terms of performance in the movie, I think they're all convincingly American. Max Minghella is my least favorite.
That is also the correct answer. And Daniel Radcliffe, he tries, and he is a good actor. I don't think he gets a lot of credit for being a good actor, honestly. I think people still see him just as Harry Potter. He does try, his American accent does go a little bit in points, but
He's in a lot of scenes.
yeah, and his American accent is better than my British accent, so I can't knock the guy for that. Anyway, who's the best Brit of the night?
Christian Bale? No, I don't know. It's a tough call. We've got a lot.
We do have some good ones.
It might still be Juno Temple. I don't know that I can choose. We had so many, and none of them were too bad, actually, with the exception of if you count Gillian Anderson as part British.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. Gillian Anderson was pretty bad.
She's our most notably bad person in any of the movies, perhaps.
I think that's probably true.
Remar was not too good, but he's American.
Yeah, I think I would ultimately have to go with the guy who played the publisher in The Raven. I really did like him.
Yeah, he was good.
Kevin McNally, almost forgot his name for a second.
I'm gonna go with Juno Temple for a different reason, because the movie was modern set, and so I feel like that if you're playing an old-timey American, you can get some leeway on not sounding totally American.
Yeah, and there is the whole Baltimore accent too thing that you might have going for you. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, accent-wise, Juno Temple I think is the best. I was just talking about general performance.
Oh.
And I really liked Kevin McNally as the publisher in The Raven.
Yeah, he is really good, and it's hard to root against Brendan Gleeson as well, who's always, I think, pretty good. Man, I don't have a choice on Best Brit, actually.
Okay.
Too crowded a field.
Well, fair enough. So my proposal for a double feature after all this time is to watch Pale Blue Eye first and get yourself bored, and then watch Horns and wake yourself back up. Because it is a deeply bad, deeply flawed, deeply dumb movie. The sad thing is I know that there are people out there who think that Horns is a super deep movie, full of lots of nuance and subtext. It's not. It's dumb, it's sleazy, it's flashy, and it's gross. But it will wake you up after Pale Blue Eye.
It's true, but it might also depress you about ever seeing a movie again. which would not maybe happen if you just saw Pale Blue Eye or just saw Horns, but if you watch them back to back. That's why I have to give your choice this week a thumbs down.
Okay.
Because Horns is a bad movie and Pale Blue Eye is a bad movie, and watching 2 bad movies in a row.
I'm gonna stick by. I don't think Pale Blue. I mean, it's a good movie in the technical sense.
And Juno Temple naked was great in Horns. So they each have something to recommend them, but I wouldn't be recommending them to anyone anytime soon.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe the best double feature of all is one that we haven't touched on. Maybe what you guys should do, if you're actually going to try any of these, is for your double feature, first watch The Raven.
In high fidelity?
Yeah. Why not?
That's a good double feature.
Yeah. Or I don't think you could do it the other way around.
2 of the Harry Potter movies. Any 2.
Yeah, we've got some weak ones this week.
Yeah.
The Raven is solid at best.
Yes.
It is the clear winner of the week for me. What about you? What's your ranking?
I agree. I'm going to go with The Raven, easily number 1, and then it's a tough call for number 2 for me. It really is. I don't know which one I would choose. I'm thinking maybe The Pale Blue Eye gets number 2, but it's a tough one. I don't. Yeah, you're right.
No, I'm just...
Who is
ooh.
correct, because Horns might be as good as Pale Blue Eye. It's a neck and neck for a far below The Raven, which once again is just solid.
And it is a bad... Horns is a bad movie, but it is a bad movie that will keep you engaged. While rewatching it, I was constantly yelling at the screen.
So I never thought about just leaving Pale Blue Eye and abandoning it.
That is true. There is that. For me, it's actually not that hard. The Raven is a clear number 1. Then there is a big gap, but Horns is for me a clear number 2, because I would rather watch something that's moving and that I can engage with, even if it's on the level of I hate you, I hate what you're doing right now. I would rather watch that than
Pale Blue Eye is just such a waste.
Yeah.
It's a waste of resources. It's a waste of ideas. Like, you go in there and you're like, there are so many things this movie could play with, and it doesn't.
Yeah, it's a waste of a stellar cast.
It just doesn't want to play with any of its toys.
And no, it doesn't. It wants to put them in a museum. Horns at least takes out its toys and plays with them.
Oh, it sure does.
And it also throws them in the fire, and you get to watch them melt. So, yeah, for me, it's Horns is the clear number 2. I would rather watch something that's garish and colorful and that I'm engaged with than kind of sit back and slip into the letting the movie pass over me thing.
Maybe Horns is number 2 just for employing James Remar.
Yeah.
Let's keep him out in Larchmont Village affording coffees every morning and being able to afford a home adjacent to Larchmont Village.
Yeah. Of course, he's not good in this movie, but then a lot of people aren't. So he doesn't stand out, and that's also a good thing.
Kind of does.
So I guess that's probably about it for this
Yeah,
episode.
we'll determine what the next one will be.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out because we don't have a choice yet. So, Matt, as we close, I do have a question for you.
What's that?
How's Annie?
I don't know.
How's Annie?
I don't know.
How's Annie?
I don't know.
Some Twin Peaks fan out there just got happy.
Oh.
All right, that's it for us. See you next time.